Live around the nation, broadcasting around the world, and live globally on the net at skynews.com.au. This is Election 2010 on Sky News.
Hello and welcome to Sky News coverage of Election Day 2010. After the 5-week campaign, this is it and you're in the right place for the most comprehensive preview, the first exit polls and the best panel of political experts you'll find on Australian television as the vote count unfolds tonight. We've got reporters across the country in all of the key seats and with the leaders. We'll get to some of those throughout the next few hours in the lead up to the close of polls at 6 p.m. Eastern. To start our coverage, I'd like to introduce on our panel Annie O'Rourke, former Labor advisor and a communications consultant. Hi, Annie.
Hey, how you doing?
And Janet ALBRECHTSEN, a columnist and a commentator, political commentator with The Australian. Janet, thank you for joining us. Tell me, what are you both hearing? First to you, Janet. What's your instinct on how this will all unfold over the next few hours?
Well, I guess, you know, here in New South Wales, Labor's worst dreams are coming true. I think there's a lot of anger out there. I'm hearing stories of what I like to call Tony Abbott's new soccer mums, the women with tattoos turning up and screwing up the bits of ALP pamphlets that they're getting at the polling booths. I noticed when I went to vote today, I've never had to queue. It was the longest queue that I've ever seen, and it sort of wound around the unfinished Julia Gillard Memorial Hall, so it was quite a piece of vision, I thought.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the sense has been that people are disenchanted with both sides of politics, and in fact that the informal vote might be up because they can't bring themselves to vote for either side. But you're saying that the baseball bats are out there in certain areas.
I think the baseball bats are in Queensland. I think the machine guns are out in New South Wales. I think there's that level of distrust and disappointment with the state Labor government, which has to feed into the federal situation. When it gets that long and that deep, you cannot avoid it.
Certainly things are very close, Annie. I spoke to a cabinet minister just before coming onto air, and he said the one thing for certain is, well, that in his view, he doesn't think we'll be able to call a result by 10:30 tonight. It's that close.
Look, obviously, you know, the whole commentary the last, you know, really 10 days has been how close it is. I actually think it could go either way. Obviously being close, but as in, I think there's so many seats that are got small margins that could go, like, you know, I can count for a handful of maybe 10 seats that could really go either way, and that could make the election not such a knife edge if there is a swing either way. Because
we are going to get the results early by recent standards. Most of the polls close at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. 122 seats will be counted from that point. So if there is a clear result, we'll know it early, but the general consensus is only that there won't be a clear result tonight.
Yeah, that's what some commentators are saying. I think, though, that we'll be able to see if there is a swing on or not, particularly up in Queensland, where some of the seats that were won last time were won by 14, 15, 13, 10%, you know, a handful of them. We'll need to see big swings, and we'll start hearing about that quite early if that's the case. And if those swings are on, then things are going to be very difficult. But if they're not as big, then we'll also get a bit of an indication. So I think there's, you know, although I think the outcome could be 6 seats either way, I think that we'll know by a swing because of the swings that we need to actually claim some seats.
Janet, what's your sense?
I think we're going to see a lot of movement in those seats where there was a huge swing to Kevin Rudd in 2007. There's a lot of elasticity in those seats, so you can expect, like a rubber band, to see the votes come back to the Liberal Party. Seats like Leichhardt, Dawson, Ford, Longman. I think you know, there's going to be a great deal of movement in those seats.
Okay, well let's bring up the map of Queensland now and just look at some of the seats we're talking about. Queensland particularly, those ones: Leichhardt, Dawson, Flynn, all red as we speak, Janet.
Yeah.
But you're expecting all of those to be blue by the end of the night?
Absolutely. And if you look at Ford, look at Longman. There's a 1.9% margin. At the last election, there was a 10.3% swing to Labor. Now, even I guess I mean the bookies have got Labor holding this seat, and perhaps that's because...
This is Longman, just north of Brisbane, around the Sunshine Coast area.
And it might be because the Liberals are or the LNP are running such a young candidate, but you'd have to give the Liberals a chance, or the LNP a chance there.
He's been described by one of my colleagues as the Doogie Howser of Australian politics, this young guy, Wyatt Roy. He's 20 years old.
Well, you know, he failed to become a prefect at his high school just a few years ago, but yet he may end up in federal parliament, so...
And John Sullivan didn't help him, Annie, the last 24 hours. Wide reporting of what was seen as a gaffe, a comment on radio, helping this guy who's voting for the first time as well as being a candidate.
That's right. Look, and he's apologised for that. However, there also has been some, I understand, talk back today in support of what John Sullivan said as well.
But do you think Longman's gone?
Well, I'm not prepared to concede anything at this stage, and particularly I think Longman's actually one of our possibilities tonight. I think our best chances are obviously in Dixon, Herbert and Bowman. But I'm actually...
Dixon here, Peter Dutton's seat. It's blue on the screen, but it's notionally Labor, isn't it, after the redistribution? You think you're still a chance there?
I think there's a good chance there. I also think that the only the one thing that could buck the trend north is Leichhardt. I think Jim Turner has been an amazing local candidate, and people, when I've been in Cairns with party members, they have, he's got a very good profile there. He's extremely hardworking, one of the most hardworking local candidates you can find. And also his competition is the former person who retired, and people do feel that he did a lap of honour before he left. And
Warren Ench but he is a popular local figure, and certainly name recognition is not an issue, is it?
That's right. That is true, but people do feel he's had his go, so that can also be a feeling. So look, I'm not saying that. I think it's still going to be very, very tight there. I just think that Jim, certain personalities can sometimes buckle the trend, and I think that he's one of those people we can watch out for.
What about one that I'm really fascinated by is Herbert. You've got Peter Lindsay, the incumbent, Janet, he's retiring, and the candidate for Labor, Tony Mooney, the Townsville mayor, up against a local auctioneer. That's going to be a very close race, that one, and it seems Labor put a lot of money into it, building the Townsville Ring Road, and the NBN rollout starts on the mainland in Townsville. So Julia Gillard has really focused on that seat, hasn't she?
She has, yeah. Again, I always look at what the bookies are saying, and it looks like the Libs will get Herbert, but it's not as close run as some of the other seats in Queensland.
Okay,
So
let's just cross.
The other issue that is playing out, that I understand is playing out up there is the broadband issue. There's a real feeling in that area.
In Herbert.
The need for the broadband to keep them as a buzzing regional centre.
It may change though, Annie, after they've realised they might need to pay $3,000 per house to actually get onto the broadband.
Well, I
these
think
stories that are
$3,000
coming
a house
out
is what people pay on a computer, and I don't think that what they do know is that what's missed opportunity. And I think that has been a successful scare campaign about the amount of money. But people I speak to know that IT costs up, but know that they cannot afford not to be on the information superhighway.
Okay, guys, let's just cross now to the Abbott camp, where Tony Abbott's proceedings will unfold tonight in Sydney, the Four Seasons Hotel. Caitlin Raper, our reporter, is there. Caitlin, preparations obviously well underway for the Liberal function tonight.
Yes, Kieran, I'm outside ballroom number 1, where inside a final sound check is underway, and Liberal Party faithful are decking the room out in Liberal blue. Of course, Mr Abbott has spent the day campaigning around Sydney, no doubt hoping to secure the swing the coalition needs to ensure that when he takes to the stage here tonight, it's a victory speech he delivers, not a concession speech. In the dying days of this campaign, we've seen many concede that the momentum has been with Mr Abbott and the coalition, but whether it's enough to get them over the line tonight, we'll have to wait probably some hours to see. And
Caitlin, we saw the 36-hour marathon, but he continued it today, didn't he? Hit a number of seats on the final day, right to the wire. He's taking this right to the line, isn't he?
He did, Kieran. He began the day in his own seat of Warringah, where he manned the sausage sizzle at the Queenscliff Surf Club. He was then joined by his wife and 3 daughters, his daughter Francie returning from overseas for today. They cast their votes in his electorate. Then he moved on to the electorate of Bennelong on Sydney's North Shore, where he campaigned with the high-profile candidate John Alexander, who's hoping to reclaim the seat of Bennelong for the coalition after it was snatched by Labor in 2007 by Maxine McHugh. He then moved on to Western Sydney in the seat of Lindsay, a seat the coalition is also hopeful of picking up. He there made his final pitch to voters, much along the same lines of what we've heard from Mr Abbott over the past 5 weeks. His pledge to pay back the debt, stop the waste, stop the stop the big new taxes and to stop the boats. That last one in particular key in the seat of Lindsay, where we know that border protection has been a hot issue. While there, though, he also accused Labor of dirty tricks. Several Labor volunteers there were decked out in plain blue shirts, unadorned with a Labor logo, handing out how to vote cards, obviously trying to blend in as Liberal volunteers. He described that as deceitful. He's promised to keep on campaigning tonight until 6 p.m. when the polls close, so still a few more hours ahead in this marathon last push for Mr Abbott. Kieran.
Caitlin Raper, thank you very much for that at the Four Seasons Hotel in Sydney. Janet Albrechtsen, Annie O'Rourke, I want to ask you both about that seat of Bennelong. John Alexander is the favourite according to the bookies, as you can see here. It is going to, well, it is red at the moment, Janet, but you'd have to say the former tennis player is in line to pick that up tonight. A bit of sweet revenge for the former Prime Minister as well.
Oh, it is, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think Maxine McHugh will lose that seat. I think the celebrity candidate, there were lots of, a bit like Kevin Rudd, there were lots of expectations on Maxine McHugh, and really she hasn't been seen a lot over the last 3 years. And so John Alexander looks set to take that seat. And
the margin's less than 2%, Annie. That's not looking good for you, is it, tonight?
Yeah, look, I think that if you look back to this time last year, last election, a lot of people didn't actually think that Maxine could beat Howard, and that's because it's quite hard to poll a lot of people in the seat. So I think that obviously there's a really tough fight going on there. I really reject her, the idea that she'd be called a celebrity candidate. She's had a long time in being involved in journalism and politics, and she's worked that seat very hard. And I think that there's been a damaging whispering campaign saying she hasn't done that, but I think she actually has worked it really hard. I know the other day she sent out messages of good luck to all the soccer teams playing in the area and local soccer clubs and things like that, and a lot of them had interactions back and forth with her on email. So I think she does have a really good local connection there. But I think the main thing is that a lot of people in that seat are hard to poll, and we saw that in the 2007 election where people thought that Howard had the seat locked in, and then they were surprised at the swing to Maxine. So there's that.
Just anecdotally, I'm hearing from people that I know who are in Bennelong today who, again, have said that there is a very strong anti-Labor resentment there.
In Bennelong.
And of course, the irony is that Maxine was one of Kevin Rudd's greatest supporters, and yet the stories that I'm hearing from Bennelong are people going up to the Labor volunteers and saying, I won't be voting for that backstabber Gillard.
Wow.
So,
okay.
there's
that is a great irony there. I want to ask you now about Lindsay. This seat, which has been a bellwether in recent times, held by Jackie Kelly throughout the Howard years. David Bradbury won it. It's in Western Sydney, the foot of the Blue Mountains. And David Bradbury, a margin of 6.3%. That's going to be tough, though, because of all of those reasons we were discussing before with Caitlin. Asylum seekers, cost of living, Annie, they're issues that are biting, and that's going to be close there, isn't it?
Look, I think I think it's going to be very tough to hold on to that seat, and I think the cost of living issue is very high, and I think that there's a case where Labor hasn't sold its message of protecting jobs during the global financial crisis or the paid maternity leave program. They haven't. That's a clear area where they haven't penetrated that message enough because cost of living is really hurting in that community.
OK, well, let's go to Lindsay now. Our reporter Nina May is there. Nina, as we have just said with the guys here, David Bradbury's got a real fight on his hands, doesn't he?
Oh, does he what, Kieran? Yeah, we're here at the St Mary's RSL, which is where David Bradbury will be coming later on this evening. Pretty sedate environment at the moment. You can see the St Mary's Scorpions behind me doing their lawn bowls here on a Saturday. It'll either be sedate later on today, or it'll be a real party atmosphere depending on how things turn out for David Bradbury. A swing of 6.3% is needed to unseat him by his Liberal opponent, Fiona Scott, and a real measure of just how important this seat is to both Labor and the Coalition, because of course this morning we saw Julia Gillard side by side with David Bradbury, Tony Abbott also spending time with Fiona Scott today. So that's a real indication of just how crucial the seat of Lindsay is. Labor has so much to lose here, the Coalition coalition so much to gain. We're talking an area here which is people who are really concerned about transport. They're concerned about asylum seekers. David Bradbury very vocal on that issue, concerned about the cost of living, a lot of pressures for people in this area, and certainly you'd imagine both sides would be extremely nervous today. This could go either way. Extremely tight contest, a swing of 6.3%, which on paper might seem like a fair amount, but in reality, and when you take a look at the logistics and what's really going on here in the seat of Lindsay, then it could be and it will be an extremely tight race tonight.
Nina May, thank you for that. We'll chat to you throughout the night as we watch what is going to be a fascinating race in Lindsay. David Bradbury ran for that seat in 2001, 2004. He's certainly done the yards, and if he gets across the line tonight, that will be quite an achievement. Particularly, Janet, when you look at just a couple of months ago, June, that Penrith by-election saw a swing of more than 25%, unprecedented.
Yeah, we don't need to see much of that to have a different result in Lindsay today.
And I think this seat, more than any other, has really captured the sense that, you know, state issues spilling over into the federal sphere. Annie, Labor, the Labor brand at the state level is on the nose. And do you look back now at that Parramatta to Epping rail link promise as a mistake because it just reminded people of the broken promises in the past?
Look, I certainly don't think it was a mistake because I think it's actually needed infrastructure, and I think there's, you know, there's mistakes around how to sell messages, but I think the idea of it is really important and very needed, and it will one day have to come to fruition. So I think that having a commitment to it is really important. What I think is interesting and is that yes, there is definitely problems for Labor and both at a state level and a federal level in Western Sydney area, but I don't think it's like right across New South Wales. Like I'm hearing really good reports from seats like Eden Monero where people have been incredibly happy with the money for economic stimulus programs, the local government initiatives, the schools, the infrastructure that was absolutely along the south coast of New South Wales really needed and has been neglected for a long time.
Both sides actually believe that Eden Monero looking like it's going to be a Labor hold, Janet. So that would be the bellwether seat since 1972. It's gone with the government of the day. If Abbott gets across the line, most believe Mike Kelly will get across the line himself in Eden Monero over the Liberal candidate David Gazzard.
Just showing that we can't always rely on history, can we? I mean, you know, it wasn't so long ago that all the smarty pants in the Labor Party were saying that first-term governments do not get voted out. Look how close they are now to this very thing. And Eden Monero, yes, sure, it's been a bellwether seat, but you know, maybe not.
Well,
and I think, you know, it's getting less likely. It's becoming less certain as a Labor hold. Absolutely. In the last few days.
Well, I think anything in New South Wales is going to be difficult. Look, let's look at one of the issues which has been an underlying factor right throughout this campaign, the Rudd factor. Let's cross now to the seat of Griffith. David Lipson is there. David, the Prime Minister's seat, no problem for him there, but geez, he's had a presence. He's cast a pall over this whole campaign for Labor.
He certainly has, Kieran, and just behind me here at the ASHLEIGH Club, they are getting set up. This room has only been open for about a week and they're going to kick things off with a bang tonight. It'll be fascinating to watch the mood in this room. Clearly it'll be very different to the elation in 2007 when Kevin Rudd was swept to power in a Rudd slide, particularly if tonight there is an Abbott Lanch. Well, things will be very different in this room. As you say, Kevin Rudd has really dominated a lot of this campaign. He's been a largely silent but certainly not an invisible third party, if you like, of this election campaign. Everything from his gallbladder surgery, him accepting a job with the UN, all of this stole vital oxygen from Julia Gillard's campaign, and also those very damaging leaks. Although Kevin Rudd always denied that he was the source of those leaks, there were some within the Labor Party that thought it must have been him or at least one of his supporters. So really he has played a huge role in this election campaign. It's just 2 short months since he was dismissed as Prime Minister, and the way in which that was done has left a really bad taste in the mouths of many people, particularly here in Queensland, and it's really resonated and will
David, stay with us
in the way people have voted today.
David, stay with us. I've got Janet ALBRECHTSEN and Annie O'Rourke here, and we'll bring them into the discussion with you because this is an important and such a, I suppose, decisive issue in this campaign, because no matter what Julia Gillard's done, Annie, there's been that, and you used to work for Kevin Rudd, you know the situation well, they just couldn't argue their legacy as effectively as they might have hoped to do because of what David was just referring to.
Yeah, look, I appreciate that has been a problem for Labor and a problem for the team. They've been, and you can actually look from the start off of the election, the first week where it looked like Gillard was doing very well, Tony Abbott was stumbling along, and then there were the leaks, and that had a huge drop effect on the Labor polling, and so look, there's no doubt it's been an effect. Hopefully what people will see is that he's got off his sick bed to say I'm going to help this team beat Abbott, and that's the message that Labor's trying to get out. But
neutralise some of the resentment there, Janet, because as David said, in Queensland there is a lot of resentment about the way their Queenslander Prime Minister was treated, even though they didn't like him, it seemed, according to the polls anyway.
Yeah, I guess I don't fall for the neutralising line. I don't think that is happening for two reasons. Every time Kevin Rudd appears on television, he is a reminder of what happened, and it's only a few short months ago. And it was interesting to see Kevin Rudd on Friday in the seat of Melbourne. What is this, the parting gift from Kevin Rudd and Lindsay Tanner to Julia Gillard? Melbourne looks like it's lost. Why was he campaigning in Melbourne for Lindsay Tanner? I thought that was a very interesting and odd move by him.
David Lipson, when it comes to Kevin Rudd, and the leaks that Annie referred to, many in Labor believe he was responsible. There were suggestions that it might have been Lindsay Tanner as well. He denied them. But the bottom line is the result tonight will have an impact on how Mr Rudd's legacy is considered as well, because, of course, we know history is written by the victor.
Yeah, that's precisely right, Kieran, and it will be really interesting to watch exactly the words he says, but also the mood he has, because you remember the only time that we saw him alongside Julia Gillard this whole campaign was that very icy staged meeting that the pair of them had in Brisbane, and a lot of people will be reading the expressions on Kevin Rudd's face tonight.
OK, David Lipson, thank you very much for that. Let's look at a couple of other areas. I want to look at Melbourne now. Janet ALBRECHTSEN, Lindsay Tanner, you referred to him. This seat is going to be really interesting to see the result, because the Greens look like they'll be making history tonight with Adam Band.
They will, and I think it could cause all sorts of chaos for the Parliament if it's very close. And if either party needs to rely on the Green vote, then things are not going to be too great politically. I think things are going to be very
looks
difficult.
like Adam Bant, according to all the bookies, is the favourite to win Melbourne tonight, Annie, and I think that High Court decision helped bring in a lot of younger voters in that seat.
It certainly did. I'm actually going to go against the trend today and say that Labor will hold Melbourne.
You're confident of that?
I think they will, yep.
The candidate, Kath Baltzell?
Yep, she's run a very good local campaign, and Janet was talking about Kevin being there the other day. I understand he had got a really good reception, really took on people who were talking about, wanting climate change, progressives, and did very well for Kath, and she was very happy that he was there. So I think that there is lots of, he said, she said, what said about what people are doing in the campaign and things like that. But actually, all I can see, and when I've spoken to Kevin and what I've seen of him, is he is putting his shoulder to the wheel.
Well, that would be quite a prediction if you get that right, because most people think it is going to go to the Greens. Look, at these seats now, Corangamite, Darren Cheeseman up against Sarah Henderson, the former ABC presenter, Walkley Award winner. Her father was a member for Parliament, state level for Geelong, so she's well known. This is interesting in outer Melbourne. Corangamite, particularly when Labor's hopeful of winning Latrobe and McEwen in Melbourne's north and Latrobe in Melbourne's east. So they might pick up two, but you might lose one there, Annie. So it's a net game of just one. Yeah, look, I think that is. I think that's again, absolutely right. A good analysis. I think that the Liberal candidate in Corangamite has been really, really well funded, and from what I understand on the ground, there's just Liberal paraphernalia everywhere. And look, in a seat that they just won in 2007. It's going to be hard to hold. And Janet, if they do win Corangamite, it looks like it'll be against the trend, because most of the polls show that the hometown factor's working for Julia Gillard, not just in Victoria, but South Australia
So
as well.
you're saying if the Libs win Corangamite?
If the Libs win Corangamite off Darren Cheeseman...
Yeah, I don't think they will.
You think he'll hold that?
Yeah, I think he will. Because I think Victoria, you know, we've seen the completely different trend in Victoria compared to New South Wales and Queensland. Much closer to what's happening in South Australia, where there's not a great deal of change. Much safer for
Okay,
Labor.
well, in that context, then, let's look at Adelaide, because I want to have a look at the hometown where Julia Gillard grew up, the seats of Boothby and Sturt. The only blue on that map, held by Andrew Southcott, Christopher Pyne. Janet, do you think that the hometown factor, I think Unley High School's in the seat of Sturt. Christopher Pyne has a margin of less than 1%, but he does have a high profile.
Yeah, I think Chris Pyne will be okay in Sturt. I think it's more problematic in Boothby, but even then I think the Libs will probably hold that seat. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of change in South Australia, despite the hometown girl.
Boothby as well, you think?
Boothby,
That's
yeah,
Andrew
I think they'll hold that. Yeah, despite the hometown girl factor.
Annie, your thoughts?
Well, the thing is that Adelaide, obviously, South Australia being 30 minutes behind us, we'll be able to see the swing come, if there is a swing either way, coming across the states. And I think that with some of the seats only held by, 1-2%, I think that the Gillard hometown factor will really help. But I think actually in South Australia, there's a lot of local issues and a lot of concern about jobs, and that'll also play a very big factor, as it always does in South Australia, the economy, employment, and I think that Labor's sold very well there a message about training, apprenticeships and traineeships, and I think that that will help in some of those very tight seats.
I should point out that there's an exit poll that's been released this afternoon, a Morgan exit poll of 1,200 voters. It's a text message poll. Anyway, 1,200, and it's as I say, an exit poll, a sense. It's 51-49 to Labor, similar to the published polls. Right, but that's not really the issue, is it, today? The issue is the local parochial issues that Annie was talking about, right up and down the coast, because you've got so many different issues at play, and even statewide trends are difficult.
Let me just come back to what I was saying before. In South Australia and in New South Wales and in Queensland, it's been interesting to watch Julia Gillard. She's cut a pretty lonely figure wandering around these states.
I've
She's
just
not
been told
seen with
we've got a special guest joining us in Wentworth, the seat of Wentworth. Not a problem for the Liberals. We've got Lee Hatcher with Malcolm Turnbull. Lee, Malcolm Turnbull will be he won't be in much trouble tonight, you would have thought, in that eastern suburb seat of Sydney.
No, he sure won't, Kieran. He holds the seat by 3.9% margin. Malcolm Turnbull joins us now. I want to know what's the kind of vibe on the at the polling booths today. How's it gone?
It's been very positive. So we won't know until the votes are counted, but we've had a very positive reception today.
Anything different with the late resurgence in the opposition that the coalition that people are talking about? Is there any difference in the tone of the lineups today at the polling booths?
Well, nobody has said to me today, or indeed on any day during this campaign, that they are voting Labor with any enthusiasm. People have told me they're voting Labor, but they've said it with a heavy heart, with an air of resignation about it. So I think Labor's disappointed its supporters so massively, so unprecedentedly, with their lack of conviction, their lack of competence. I think, it'll be very interesting to see. I'm not making a prediction. It's too close.
No, of course.
Too close.
I'm keen to also know what you think of Tony Abbott's campaign. How do you measure that? What's your assessment?
Well, look, I think he has run an outstanding campaign. I couldn't fault it, and I don't think... if he had the chance to do it over again, I don't think he could improve on it. Yeah. So I think he's run a magnificent campaign. Win, lose or draw. He's done a great job.
In your quieter moments, and I know there are not many, there's never been a thought of, that could have been me.
Well, look, honestly, I don't look back. You've just got to look forward, and the objective is to win government. Tony's the leader, so that means he is Prime Minister. Politics is a team business. And, you take your knocks and you get a few disappointments along the way, but you just have to dust yourself off and either continue playing with the team or not.
As a former opposition leader, your assessment of the Prime Minister's campaign?
Oh, it's been terrible. I mean, just dreadful. It's difficult. I cannot think of a worse campaign. It's been, riven with, Labor Party backstabbing. Well, of course, it began with the stabbing of Kevin Rudd, I guess. But then, there was all of those leaks that were designed to damage her. You've had the bizarre interference from Mark Latham, the even more bizarre business where Julia Gillard said, well, you know, that wasn't the real Julia you've been listening to for the last few months. Now here's the real Julia, you know, and then the guy that she had to get rid of because the government was losing its way, Kevin Rudd, has to then be resurrected and brought back into the firing line so that she can have a chance of winning. It is, I mean, you could not write a script of a worse campaign than Labor's had.
Back to your side of politics, I take it your passion for climate change and emissions trading, ETS, remains the same.
Well, my commitment to taking effective action on climate change is absolutely undiminished.
Do you feel the disconnect or the discord that in your own party about that?
Oh, not at all. I think the coalition doesn't have a market-based mechanism, a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme, as its means of reducing emissions, but we do have a policy. It's not an ideal policy from my point of view, but I've never been one to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I mean, this is the coalition's policy, which involves buying carbon offsets, certainly has the potential to meet our 2020 target. So, you know, which now you could say it's not the best policy in the world, but it's better than having no policy at all, which is Labor's position. I mean, how could the Labor Party get into such a mess that the issue that was so fundamental to their win in 2007 now has no policy response? They don't have a climate change policy. All they've got is a notice for a meeting for a focus group. It's truly bizarre.
Your position for the future. What does Kevin Rudd's execution demonstrate as a lesson to political parties in the future about knocking off leaders?
Well, I think it's something that the Labor Party has got to have a really long, hard look at itself and say, they're no longer a broad-based party. They're a party of political professionals, of apparatchiks. They are controlled by faceless men. You know, they're controlled by union heavies. This is not a grassroots political organisation. I mean, it was extraordinary. On the night that Kevin Rudd was rolled, you had people as senior and important as the Defence Minister and former Senate leader John Faulkner there not knowing what was going on with Kevin Rudd, at the same time as you had the Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, Paul Howes, on television gloating about his role in bringing the Prime Minister down. It's pretty sick.
Malcolm Turnbull, thanks very much for your time. We'll let you go.
Okay,
and
good to see you.
Kieran, we should get the big booths in Wentworth, the results through from them by about 8 or 9 o'clock tonight, and that's when we'll know how Malcolm Turnbull has done.
Lee Hatcher, appreciate that. Thank you very much. You're watching Sky News coverage of Election Day. 2.5 hours to go before the polls close.
Live around the nation, broadcasting around the world, and live globally on the net at skynews.com.au. This is Election 2010 on Sky News.
Thanks for being with us on Sky News coverage of Election Day 2010 as the countdown is on to the close of polls in the eastern states. With me here, I've got Annie O'Rourke, former Labor advisor and communications consultant, and Janet ALBRECHTSEN, columnist and political commentator at the Australian newspaper. Guys, I want to take your attention now to WA, specifically to Perth. Now, this was a huge problem for Labor ahead of that mining tax announcement by Julia Gillard. Has she done enough, do you think, Annie, to neutralise the problems in ASHLEIGH, that seat there in Swan? They're the two that Labor, this is notionally Labor now as well, that Labor are hoping to claim. Do you think that they're a chance for you?
Look, I think Western Australia is obviously going to be very tough. It you know, went against the trend in 2007. It's not happy hunting ground for Labor candidates, really. But I think if we do well in ASHLEIGH, it'll be Sharon Jackson has done an amazing job there, and there'll be no thanks to her huge efforts there. I think that there's been community cabinets held there. There's been a lot of attention put onto ASHLEIGH. So I think that you know, it can be held, but it is going to be really tight with such a low you know, they only hold the seat by a handful. In fact, there's quite a few seats like that. You know, a handful of votes will see it go either way.
It's a tiny margin in a couple of those seats around Perth. Let's go to the Perth surrounds here. This is the seat of Canning, held by Don Randall, but you've got that high-profile former State Minister, Alana McTiernan, who Labor feels is still a chance. They're not as confident as they were a few days ago with a margin over 4%. But Janet, they think she's a chance there simply because of the name recognition factor and her popularity.
Yeah, I suspect Canning will be a hold for the Liberal Party. I mean, the Liberal Party even talking about winning brand because of all the fly-in, fly-out workers, the mining workers there, because I think the mining tax is still a big issue. Yes, it's been solved with some of the big mining companies, but it hasn't been solved.
Do you think that's a risk, Brand? Gary Gray?
Look, it's not on my radar at the moment, but it's just going to be tough in Western Australia, full stop. But I'd say Brown would hold tonight.
All right, let's look at...
I think there's a lot of good messages. There has been, you know, difficult times about the mining tax, but there's also a lot of people who, through a whole range of reasons, want infrastructure in Western Australia, and they know that the mining tax will bring that infrastructure. So there's actually, you know, in some pockets, a lot of support.
So you're not that you're not optimistic, but you're not pessimistic ahead of the count tonight in WA, because of course polls close a bit later. This could be the state, the city, that decides the outcome if everything else is so close. If Labor can hold Hasluck, possibly pick up Canning against the trend, that might be enough. If they lose everything there, they're gone.
Julia Gillard's lucky that she doesn't have one of those toxic state Labor governments in WA to deal with. So, you know, she's got that on the eastern seaboard, but not over in WA. So you might see that. You might see things not as
So do you think
unfavourable.
Tony Abbott's been held down there by the state government there?
Not held down, but I think that, you know, there's just been such a strong anti-state Labor sentiment on the eastern seaboard. You don't have that in WA. You know, you don't have it
Definitely
in Victoria.
in Queensland, New South Wales. That's a big issue.
Yeah, I think it's in New South Wales. I actually think that in Queensland there are certain areas that, you know, that are looking good for Labor.
But I mean, Anna Bligh's got a disapproval rating of somewhere, you know, around 68%.
Yeah.
She hasn't, again, she's one of these premiers who has not been seen bar once with Julia Gillard. Remember how many times Julia Gillard has been up in Queensland this campaign. No, Julia Gillard does not want to be seen with Anna Bligh. She does not want to be seen with Christina Keneally. It is a problem in both states, I think.
I think, though, that the Queenslanders have got, you know, they know that the infrastructure, they need infrastructure there. They need things like broadband, they need infrastructure. And that's what they've got from the Labor government and the Labor legacy.
Well, OK, let's think about Queensland then at a state level. I mean, I know it's hard to even contemplate state swings with any sort of surety, but what would be the best case scenario for Labor tonight in terms of the number of seats? If you can keep it to maybe 4 or 5 seats, that'd be ideal, wouldn't it, in Queensland?
Yeah, that's right.
And the worst case?
Oh, it could be a loss of 6 to 7.
Not double figures?
I don't think it'll get that far.
All right. Let's look at the top end, Northern Territory. There's 2 seats, Lingiari and Solomon. It's only really this seat here around Darwin that is the traditional marginal seat. Janet Albrechtsen, Damien Hales, the incumbent, former footy coach, seems to be pretty popular, but it is such a tight margin, there always is, that might be a spanner in the works for Labor if the Libs can pick up that.
Yeah, it could be. It's only just a Labor favourite, so, you know, it's going to be interesting to see where Solomon goes. I think this is one of the seats that really you want to see move to the Liberal Party if the swing is on.
With 0.2%.
Yeah, you'd expect that to go.
OK, let's cross to the Melbourne Convention Centre now. Ashley Gillon, our political reporter, is there. Ahead of Julia Gillard's function tonight, Ashley, obviously preparations underway. A lot of the mood among Labor today. You've been with them, travelling with them for days. What's the sense?
Well, look, Kieran, we saw that today Julia Gillard spent the morning in Western Sydney before arriving here in Melbourne. Here in the Convention Centre, the final audio checks are happening, lighting checks, all of the Labor paraphernalia starting to be put up around the place. But, of course, Julia Gillard won't be here until much later in the night. She voted probably about half an hour ago, and we won't see her again until tonight. We understand that her family members have flown into Melbourne so they can all have a family view viewing as the results start to come through here. I think over the last couple of days, the mood among the travelling Labor camp was that they were starting to look a little bit more stressed, a bit more nervous as we saw the polls tightening towards the last few days. And even Julia Gillard herself, her mood up for the last 4.5 weeks was really upbeat. She was really positive and confident. In the last couple of days, we saw a big change from Julia Gillard. She seemed a bit more nervous, a bit more stressed. We saw that attack line from Julia Gillard all day yesterday. She hit some 5 marginal seats around that key battleground of Western Sydney, focusing in on things like work choices and warning voters about the risks she says Tony Abbott poses if he becomes Prime Minister. So it was quite a negative end to Labor's campaign.
Ashley, you've been, as I say, on the campaign for 5 weeks. You've seen the polls come and go. Today's the big one. What's your sense? How do you think this is going to end up?
Well, look, my personal sense, I think that Labor will get over the line tonight, but obviously losing a lot of seats. I would say they'd get a seat of, I don't know, 2 or 3 seats. That's my tip. But look, it is so close that it really is just too hard to predict. And gosh, after the last, 6 months of politics or even 3 months of politics we've had here in Australia, why would you want to predict anything? Back at 2007, John Howard versus Kevin Rudd, if you'd told us then that this election was going to be Tony Abbott versus Julia Gillard, well, you'd say, what tracks are you on, or, where has that come from? Because the scenario just seems so bizarre. But look, it does seem like it will be so close tonight. We're going to have to wait and see how it all unfolds through the evening.
A fascinating night ahead. Well, you've held up very well after a gruelling 5 weeks. A great job. Good on you, Ashley. Thanks for that. Janet Albrechtsen, if Tony Abbott falls short, as Ashley's predicting there, as a lot of people are, he'll still be seen as a bit of a Liberal hero, won't he? But will that guarantee him 3 years in the job? Because you know how tough it is, the 24-hour news cycle, the scrutiny, how gruelling modern politics is. Do you think he would survive 3 years if he lost by a whisker?
I don't think he would fail because of media scrutiny. I think Tony Abbott is one of those politicians who has endured a lot of media scrutiny in his time. It won't be that brings him down. It'll be the unity or lack thereof within the Liberal Party if there is a loss. But I think you're right, and John Howard said it today. He really has brought the Liberal Party back from the dead. It wasn't only 9 months ago they looked like a complete rabble. They are now within a whisker of winning the election. Now, I don't think that would have happened under any former leader we've had since John Howard left. I think that's Tony Abbott's doing, and it's a credit to him. He basically was the reason that Kevin Rudd was replaced. They thought that Julia Gillard would be an absolute shoo-in against Tony Abbott. Well, he's proven them wrong.
OK, well, we were discussing WA a bit earlier. Annie, I'll get your thoughts on Tony Abbott, and also I want to get your thoughts on the prospects for Labor if there is a loss. Let's cross to WA now, to one of those key seats in Perth. We've got Michael Willesee there. Michael, we've been saying it, there's 3 or 4 seats that could end up being the deciders tonight. Could be late into the night that we're waiting for those numbers over there in the west.
Yeah, Kieran, it sure could be. I hope people have got comfortable chairs, comfortable couches in their living rooms, because it really could be a late night. Western Australia, as you say, could be absolutely crucial in deciding this election. It's across the board. I think fundamentally Western Australia is a Liberal state. It's fair to say that there's a Liberal state government, a popular Liberal state government. Of the 15 federal seats in Western Australia, 11 of them are held by the Libs. Last election, 2007, despite the Rudd slide across the rest of Australia, there was actually a swing towards Liberal in a lot of the seats, and they even pinched Cowan from the Labor Party, which was a big result considering the landscape of that election. The key issues seem more to be the major issues here in Western Australia, and not seats like Hasluck are not being fought out on local issues. Border protection's a big one. A very, very big unguarded coast in Western Australia. It's top of mind for a lot of voters. There isn't in Western Australia the same level of manufacturing and industry as a lot of the other states, and with that there isn't the same culture of Labor Party and the union movement here. It's a primary producers, a lot of agriculture, fisheries, and of course mining. Resources huge over here, and the mining tax has been incredibly unpopular for Julia Gillard and the Labor government. And even the new version of the mining tax has not been received at all well. And guys like Andrew Forrest, Twiggy Forrest, has been very vocal all over the radio yesterday, imploring West Australians not to vote for Julia Gillard. So that's a very big issue. Another point of that issue, which is a big one here, is the parochial nature of Western Australia and the feeling that the mining tax is very much raiding the riches of WA to pay for problems in other parts of the country. So, you know, there's a big opportunity. Let's not get carried away, though. Of the 6 of the 11 Liberal seats are held by less than 6%. 3 of them are genuine marginals, less than 1.7%, so they are in play. Tony Abbott is not the most popular Liberal leader. So, as you say, it's going to be very close in a lot of these seats, and it will be a late night.
Michael, what about the seat of Canning? Before I let you go, I want to get your thoughts on that. Alana McTiernan, that well-known former state minister, up against Don Randall. The margin's about 4%, but do you think it's in play tonight?
It's in play, certainly. They think it'll go very, very close. They think Alana McTiernan's fought a fantastic campaign. The feeling is she'll fall just short. Certainly she's not favoured by the bookies. Don Randall is expected to hold, but only perhaps by 1%. But again, it's another one of those seats, Kieran. It's going to come down to today.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Michael Willesee. Appreciate it. Let's look to the ramifications, Annie. If there is a loss for Labor, this would be such a disaster. It would be seen as one of the greatest miscalculations, would it not, of Australian political history, changing leaders midstream like they did.
I think if Labor do fall short tonight and do lose, I think the biggest thing for me would be what a disappointment to lose the chance to have someone, the first female Prime Minister, to have someone of Julia Gillard's calibre leading the country through what's going to be some really difficult times. You know, if you look at the economic forecasts from Europe and America, I think that is, you know, it'll be a real loss for Australia if she doesn't get that opportunity.
You've been critical of Tony Abbott, but he's run a good campaign, you must concede that. He's been disciplined and made no gaffes. He's been a different Tony Abbott in many respects.
Yeah, look, he has certainly, you know, hasn't shown the real Tony on many occasions. He's kept his views about women and about workforce participation, his hard line on the dole and things like that, or income support. He's kept them very much under the under his hat, which is, you know, full credit to him if that's how he wants to get across the line. He's made amazing claims like that he'll only let 3 boats hit Australia's shoreline, which is just something that he cannot control, no matter what he says. I mean, there was an interesting point that someone made in the paper today that if they thought that they were going to stop boats, then maybe they would have used the closing of Christmas Island Detention Centre as part of their savings. They haven't done that, so they're obviously not seeing that asylum seekers is going to be less of an issue for them going forward if they do get over the line. I think the most amazing thing about the Liberal, besides the fact that Tony's been able to keep the real Tony under covers, I think the other thing is about the real leadership tension in either of the two political parties is actually in the Liberals. I've never ever seen in my time being involved with politics someone running as hard for the leadership as Malcolm Turnbull has been this whole campaign. His involvement on Twitter, his involvement at events, his, you know, it's palpable.
Okay. Well, that could be a moot point, Annie, particularly if Labor lose, and certainly Tony Abbott, you would have suggested, Janet, you will no doubt agree, that he's won the campaign. The question is, will he win the big one tonight? But certainly he's been disciplined, and when you compare it to 2007, that was a disaster for Tony Abbott personally. He had mistake after mistake, but he's brought that in, reined it in quite remarkably.
I think he's really grown in the job. You know, we talk about how people grow in positions, and he has certainly grown in the position as leader of the Liberal Party and as the opposition. He's run an incredibly disciplined campaign. I keep waiting for the man to keel over from exhaustion, and he's out in Bennelong. I think they've both done a pretty good job. Gillard's had a really, really tough time. I mean, I think we need to even not just talk about what happens if Julia Gillard loses. What if she wins? You know, the problem for Labor is that people
what do you mean
around,
by that? If she wins,
people around
surely
Australia,
they'll see that as...
Well, hold on. People around Australia have seen this new model of Labor in New South Wales and they don't like it. It's creeping into Canberra. Can Julia Gillard be certain that, you know, 2 years, 3 years down the track, she may be Australia's most popular Prime Minister in the same way that Kevin Rudd was? What happens when things turn? You know, does Carl Bitar and Mark Habib and Bill Shorten, do they all rise up again against Julia Gillard? I think this is one of the problems that the Labor Party now has.
The Liberals have gone through three leaders.
Well, that's true, but it's a bit. But unfortunately for
That's
Labor, that was a year ago now, and it's in opposition. It's not a sitting
Very
Prime
different.
Minister.
Oh no, it's about leadership of a party.
Yeah, leadership of a party, but not someone that was being elected. You know, Kevin Rudd was
the Westminster system, so we elect parties.
True.
So,
But you can understand the disappointment of people. You know, that they do feel that they are the people
had ownership.
That you know, Kevin Rudd ran a very presidential campaign. They feel that if they were going to get rid of him, you know, let me use my baseball bat. It shouldn't be up to Mark Habib and Carl
you've got
Bitar
to
to do
concede
it.
that there is resentment about that, particularly in Queensland.
I think that's, you know, yes, I think that has been picked up and there's been a lot of commentary about that. But I think that political parties are supposed to be not about the individual, and we don't have a presidential system. And the idea is that they're about having the same values and policies and beliefs in going forward. And what parties, if you want to implement those beliefs or those policies, and if you want Australia to go in a certain direction, you've got to win government. And the Labor Party did what it thought its parliamentary party did, what it thought would help it win government so it can continue its vision for Australia and how it wants to take Australia forward. So you could, you know, the question would be if for example, if they'd gone forward and had gone with Kevin Rudd and Kevin Rudd had not won the election, the next thing would be, why didn't they do something about it? If
Well,
they
do you
thought
think,
the polling
what's your sense? Do you think Kevin Rudd would have done better? Because at least he would have had the capacity to point to the uncertainty and the destabilisation, the leadership changes on the Liberal side, but you can't do that when you've just changed your leader. If you want to make that a political plus, you first of all got to have your own house sorted, don't you?
Look, I just think it'd be another set of issues, and I really, it's a sliding doors moment, and I don't think anyone, you know, lots of people will, over the next couple of weeks, there'll be so much paper and stories and books written, and there'll be so much he said, she said. Either way it works out.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
I suppose it's all hypothetical anyway,
that's
isn't
right.
it?
That's what I'm saying.
I want to finish. We've got a couple of minutes before we throw to the Canberra tally room and our broadcast from there for the next half an hour. I want to get your predictions. Janet, first to you. What's your prediction tonight? Tell me the margin and how close this is going to be in your view.
Well, you know, I had to do this for the Australian yesterday morning, and I predicted that Labor would win by 4 seats. I think I've changed.
Do you stand by that? No.
No, I think I've changed my mind. Things have moved so quickly. I'm a bit in the Richo corner, you know. I don't know which way to look. I think there's a chance that Tony Abbott will win, but he will just get over the line.
Okay, so 1 or 2 seats.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Hopefully not a hung parliament.
Okay, so we've got
Please,
breaking
let that
news
not
there.
happen.
Janet's prediction from the Australians changed. Annie, your thoughts?
It's really funny that you should go that way. I've actually been incredibly pessimistic and extremely concerned throughout the campaign, but I have felt differently the last couple of days. I think that Labor will hold as much as by 4 to 6 seats. And I think one of the things that's in play that's really interesting is why there's been so many postal votes and pre-polling, and you know, not just a few more. There's, I think they're saying 50 to % more, and that could put us in a position like after the Tasmania election where we might be waiting a few days. But look, I think we'll see early whether if there's a swing on or not. But I think that Gillard has done enough to hold on.
Well, you can have my prediction in the Australian then. I'll put your name on it.
So you can swap it.
Appearing on Monday.
So you think she's done enough to hold on?
Yeah.
And what was the margin you gave? Sorry, did you give a margin there?
I'm going to give her 5 seats.
A 5-seat margin. Wow.
4 to 5, just in a matter of 2 minutes.
That's
4 to 5.
That's quite a flip. And so, well, my prediction for what it's worth is a hung parliament with Adam Bandt, the Green, potentially.
Please.
Being the person. So it's your all of your wishes coming at once, Janet. I'm sure you'd be delighted with that if it eventuated. Thank you both for joining us. It's been great to chat. It should be a fascinating night ahead. Thank you for your company over the last hour. Make sure you join us right throughout the night here for the most comprehensive coverage of election 2010. We're going to cross now to a break and then to the tally room in Canberra. Peter Van Onselen will be hosting the next half an hour. David Spears and I will be back at 4:30, a little over half an hour, with the first major exit poll of this election day. So make sure you join us then.
News.
Hello and welcome to the Sky News coverage out of the National Tally Room. I'm Peter Van Onselen. Well, everyone seems to be predicting that this is going to be a very close election. Too close to call, in fact, according to a lot of commentators. The Liberal Party in recent days have become much more buoyant about their chances of victory, and the Labor Party have become increasingly pessimistic. But it's unclear whether that pessimism is them trying to get the underdog status in the lead up to the election, which we'll start knowing the results from in a matter of a few hours. I'm joined here on our panel, on the far right of the panel, from The Australian, Mike Steckity. Mike, thanks for being here. Pleasure. Closest to me on the right, we've got Nikki Sava, also columnist from The Australian. On my left, closest to me, we've got from the Sunday Telegraph, Greg O'Mahony. And on the far left of the panel, from The Australian as well, completing the News Limited cabal, we've got Christian Kerr. Gentlemen and lady, thank you very much for being with us.
Pleasure. Pleasure, Pat.
Mike, I'll start with you if I can. What are your impressions out of this campaign so far? What do you like about it? What do you loathe about it?
Well, usually you say about elections, expect the unexpected, I think. But you usually say that about the result, because normally the campaign is fairly predictable. The polls usually give you a sense of direction one way or the other. I mean, this time the unexpected has been happening all the way through. Leaders deposed, former leaders cropping up, you know, just the most extraordinary campaign.
Nikki, I've been reading some of your columns in The Australian during the campaign. You've been harsh, I think, to put it mildly, about some of the elements of it. What about this campaign in particular has, in a sense, let you down, or you think has let voters down?
I think it's just been way too negative. I think the leaders themselves have been negative. I don't think we've seen very much vision from them about how they'd like to see Australia. I don't think we've seen enough talk about values, and the advertising certainly has been way too negative. And I think certainly in the beginning when we had the unreal Julia, she just seemed to be a different person, and it took her a while to be herself, whoever that self is. I'm not too sure anymore, I have to say. We've seen so many personas, you know. Sometimes I think, oh, maybe we should call her Sybil. But
I was going to say, I think the really frustrating thing about this election has been two leaders who are standing on platforms that they don't believe in. On one hand, Mr Abbott, a man who has railed for decades about the need for flexibility in the workplace, saying the one thing he won't do if he gets elected is touch IR reform. On the other side, a Prime Minister who has, in opposition, railed against the government for its inhumane treatment of refugees, who has said that the ETS is a priority. Now, as Prime Minister, saying, basically letting down her constituents on both those fronts.
Christian, who should win? Who's going to win?
Well, my feeling is that Tony Abbott should win. He has been such an unexpected campaigner in the last few weeks. We've always known that he's got that degree of determination, but to actually see him making the pitch and the strength of that pitch in the last few weeks, I think has been so surprising, because we always knew Julia Gillard was a personable character.
It's interesting to hear you say that,
and she's the one who hasn't been herself.
You're identifying the campaign, it sounds like. If I asked you the same question 5 weeks ago, would you have probably said something different? So you're surprised by the way Abbott has campaigned? You're surprised by the discipline?
He's come out the best. I think if we're talking about real Julias, we've seen a real Tony all the time. I think we've only seen flashes of real Julia, and sometimes it's only been very, very quick flashes. A 10-minute interview, and then she's gone again.
Okay, I want to throw to John Kerrison, who's going to be roaming around the tally room all evening with us here in the Sky coverage in the tally room. John, can you hear me?
Peter and panel, thank you. Now, if this is going to be the dramatic, high-powered race to the finishing line, well then this is in effect the finishing line, the National Tally Room. There are 3 zones down here. We've got our public area where come 6 o'clock this area will be buzzing with people who have come in here to see how the tally room works and see how the numbers go up on the tally room board, which is to one side of us here. We'll have more of that a little later on. The second zone, as Andy and the camera move over this way, we've got our media section. There'll be newspapers set up here, the News Limited team. We'll have the newspapers, the television is behind me. I'll show you that in a second. Of course, there's a huge radio contingent that will also be in this room, watching those numbers very closely as they come in. Now, the television, the piece de resistance, all of the networks, including us at Sky News, have a major presence here. This is the biggest regular television broadcast that happens in Australia. So for the last week, teams have been in here, cabling up the floors, building sets, constructing roof racks for the lighting for what will be a very exciting broadcast right through this evening, and we'll be here with you from the tally room constantly till the end of the count, around midnight possibly, on Channel 602 with the Sky News team. Now, Peter, before we go back to you up there in the studio, let me tell you, we will be talking here in the tally room with key players, with senators. We'll be talking with other journalists who have been watching those numbers to see how they fall. We will be bringing you up to date with the very latest from electorates right around the country. It'll be a thriller to the finish, and we are here where the atmosphere will be buzzing to bring it to you. Right now, back to you up there. We'll be back with you in the tally room shortly.
Thanks very much for that, John. Mike, can I ask you, you've been in the tally room for a number of elections. We were talking about it in the days before now. There's not that many people behind us at the moment. It's early, the counting hasn't started. What does it get like behind us when things really start to heat up after 6 o'clock?
Well, chaotic in a word. I mean, there's people everywhere. There's media trying to file for all sorts of deadlines. You know, basically every minute around the clock, there's people trying to work out what's happening in individual seats. So it's frenetic, and I mean, it's exciting for anyone who's interested in politics. There are two, very big careers at stake. Well, more than two careers, but particularly two. It's a human drama as well.
Well, let me ask you, Nikki, about those careers, because what will victory or defeat mean for both Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard in this election?
Well, the stakes are just enormous for both of them. If she loses, she will go down in history as the first female to knife a sitting Prime Minister in his first term.
Well, let's not mince words. She'll go down as a joke if she loses. She'll unfortunately be a 2-month Prime Minister, the shortest Prime Minister in history other than acting. And
tragic, I think.
And
more
8
than
weeks for our first female Prime Minister, that would just be embarrassing for her and for the Labor Party, wouldn't it?
Well, I think it would be tragic on a whole lot of fronts if that happens, for her personally and for the Labor Party especially. Likewise for Tony Abbott, I think if the Liberals lose, he will probably stay leader for a while, but I think these days it's very unusual, if not extraordinary, for an opposition leader to go from one election to the next. So I don't think we would see him around in the next election.
Greg O'Mahony, what will you be looking for tonight, whether it's particular seats or whether it's sort of particular responses from politicians on the various panels this evening? What will you be looking for as telltale signs for how it's all going?
Well, I'll be looking particularly, in terms of seats, I'll be looking at Robertson. I know that the Prime Minister spent a good part of the last 48 hours in that seat. It's on the central coast of New South Wales. There's been a lot of talk of the seats in Western Sydney. Robertson it's an area that should be Labor heartland, and I'm hearing this afternoon that the Liberal Party is very, very optimistic about some of the polling they're seeing from people exiting the booths there. I'll also, obviously, everyone will be looking to Queensland. It's a question of can the Labor Party constrain the bloodshed up there, and early indications, I think, that it isn't. Right.
Well, before I go across to Christian Kerr, what I want to do is I want us to bring up what we're calling the magic numbers in this campaign. Here it is there, it's on screen now. These are the magic numbers. Now, let's remember, the Labor Party won 83 seats at the last election. Now, we should think of that as 82 seats, because one seat, the seat of Lowe, was abolished in New South Wales, and the new seat that replaced it, entitled Right, has been created in Queensland, and that's considered to be a pretty safe Liberal seat. It's only a 3% notional margin, but given how badly the Labor Party's going in Queensland, I think we can call that a safe Liberal get. So the Labor Party won 83 seats. They're now on 82 seats, which means that if they lose 7 seats, as you can see on the graphic, that is the magic number for them to lose their majority. They'll fall to 75. They won't be able to appoint a Speaker and maintain their control of the House. Now, the other magic number is 12 for the Coalition. If they win 12 seats, they can govern in their own right. In other words, they're on what we're calling 64 seats at the moment. They need to win 12 to be able to form a government. Now, there are some seats there that you would expect them to win comfortably. Seats like Ryan, which is a traditional Liberal Party seat. However, the city member has departed. But on top of that, there are other seats that you would think that they will pick up. Now, Christian, let me ask you, on the back of that graphic, Coalition searching for 12 seats to try to form a government. What are some seats that you're going to think are crucial to win or likely to go very early in the night?
Look, I think you really have to look to Queensland and New South Wales to get that critical weight of seats. I mean, we've always thought of Victoria as a key seat. Queensland, it's 30 electorates now. There's a lot of them when you combine that with New South Wales. I think what the Liberals will be remembering, what happened to them in 1990. When they won all those seats in Victoria off the back of the Kane government's unpopularity, won more than 50% of the popular vote, but they still lost the election. You really need to get that absolute critical mass and then a bit more. And that's why states like South Australia, Victoria, where there's the worry that the Liberals will go backwards, that could be very interesting. Will they pick up Bassenbraddon in Tasmania? Even just the one seat, Solomon and Darwin. These are all crucial, and it's why we're still, I think, quite possibly, unless things have gone absolutely disastrously today in Queensland, New South Wales, why we might still be waiting for the West.
Well, and let's go through some of these seats. I've got them in front of me. We won't go into too much detail, but we'll go through some of these seats. In Queensland, and this is based on conversations that I've had with both sides of politics, we've got seats like Leichhardt, Ford, Flynn and Bonner. So that's 4 seats in Queensland that really Labor thinks that they are likely to lose. When you look at New South Wales, seats like Macquarie, Robertson, Bennelong and Lindsay, the seat that Julia Gillard was in this morning, those are all seats that Labor are worried about losing, but they think that there may be a 50-50 chance of being able to hold on to them. In Western Australia, Haslutt is another 50-50 seat, but they're probably more on the downside on that one than on the upside. And then you've got the seat of Solomon, which you were just mentioning, Christian, in the Northern Territory. Now, that's a total of 10 seats. If they lose all of those seats, they lose their majority. It's not quite enough to give the Coalition a majority in its own right. But there are some Coalition seats, aren't there, that the Labor Party are hopeful of picking up. Mike, Victoria being the key area, seats like Latrobe and McEwen, how likely do you think they are to win some of those seats in Victoria to offset losses elsewhere?
Well, on the polling, they're very strong in Victoria. I mean, that's one of the extraordinary and unusual things about this election, how big the variation is. I mean, Victoria, there's a swing to Labor. In states like Queensland, the primary vote for Labor is down to 27%. I mean, it's almost unimaginable that a federal government is polling 27% in a state. The other thing is that there are a few seats that are always worth keeping a close eye on, such as Eden-Monaro, because Eden-Monaro, since 72, I think it is, has always changed with a change of government.
You know, that's really, can I interrupt there? Because that's really interesting that you say that about Eden-Monaro, because that's one that the betting odds suggest that the Labor Party will fairly comfortably hold it. It's one that Labor strategists are buoyant about, Liberal strategists are pessimistic about. It almost doesn't fit, given its history, as you mentioned, with the narrative that there seems to be at the moment that this election's so tight. It makes me wonder whether this narrative is a Labor narrative to try to ensure that voters don't accidentally protest against them. What do you think, Vicky?
I think everybody fibs. Everybody tells lies about their polling.
No, surely not. Politicians and political strategists not telling the truth.
I know, hard to believe, isn't it? But everybody tries to play the underdog, so it's in their interests to have people think that it's going to be as tight as possible, as close as possible. I mean, for all we know, their polling might show that their street's ahead in Eden-Monaro. But I did speak to some people today who were out there campaigning in the electorate, Liberal people, and they were really confident. So
I tell you what, if Eden-Monaro falls tonight, it is going to be a bloodbath for the Labor Party. I looked at the odds 2 hours ago, and I think a bet on the the Liberal candidate there paid about $4.20. I mean, it'd be extraordinary. It'd be extraordinary seeing.
Well, Greg, you say it's going to be a bloodbath, and Mike, you identify Eden Monaro as the bellwether seat. Normally, when governments change, there's a move, and normally it is a bloodbath, or at least close to. So perhaps Eden Monaro will stay the bellwether seat, Christian. If Labor win, they win a close election. If the Liberals win, seats like Eden Monaro and some of the others that aren't just needed but would mean a larger majority for Tony Abbott are the kind of seats that are going to go.
Let's throw another seat into the mix, Bennelong. I mean, there's that whole theory that Bennelong is the new bellwether, that it should have become a bellwether long ago, and it was purely because its member was one John Howard, that it didn't go Labor a lot earlier. And I mean, Bennelong is a seat very much in play here after only one term. So I think we've actually got to start looking at some of these sorts of seats because, you know, boundaries change. The boundaries have changed radically in Queensland. They have changed radically in New South Wales. Bennelong, it's an urban seat. It mightn't have quite the mix that Eden Monaro always had as a sort of semi-rural seat on the Canberra fringe. But I think Bennelong's very much in play. I think there's a very good chance it will change hands unexpectedly too. Well, and I think that's exactly what's going to happen tonight, unexpected.
And some Labor people as well. Liberals have been buoyant and hopeful about Bennelong. Some Labor people have said, well, if there's at least an upside in the loss, it's us losing Bennelong. That tells you how tribal the Labor Party can be, that an outsider like Maxine McHugh can come in and they can be thinking about the prospect of at least removing her if they're going to lose government. We're going to throw now to John Kerrison again on the tally room floor. John, don't tell me you've got some breaking news that they've started counting too early at the AEC, have they?
Thanks, Peter. I'm now joined here on the tally room floor by Peter Brent, who is a political commentator and blogger with The Australian. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure. It's being called a race to the finish. How would you assess the last 24 hours of this campaign?
I think we'll know in a few hours. The snapshots by the opinion polls on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights kind of had it line ball. The Australian had movement towards the coalition. The other pollsters tended to have a bit of a status quo situation, 52-48 to Labor. But then none of these public polls have phoned anyone since Thursday night. So what's happened in the last 24 hours, who knows?
Now let me take you to the Greens vote, which many commentators are saying will be interesting. We've seen in previous elections that they've polled quite strongly up until the day, and then we've seen that first preference drop. Have you got a sense whether you think that's likely to be replicated?
Yes, I mean, just going on what's happened in the past, I expect that to happen. So I think 13 or 14 is what they've been polling in the opinion polls. I think 11 or 12, maybe closer to 11. That's my guess.
Would that, in your mind, see that seat of Melbourne go to the Greens, or you think that's hopeful?
Everyone I've spoken to expects it to go to the Greens, probably. So I will defer to those people who are there on the ground. And it makes sense because the Green vote is high and the Labor vote would drop without Lindsay Tanner, the sitting member there. He would have had a good personal vote. So it makes sense. They've come close a couple of times before. So I think, from what I understand, they've got a good chance and they probably will take it tonight.
Peter, what are your views broadly of the campaign generally? Has it been a negative campaign, and which of the two parties do you think has mastered the campaign best?
There ain't no other kind of campaign except a negative campaign, I don't think. I think the Labor Party campaign has been like other government campaigns. If you vote for the opposition, if they get in, the world's going to collapse. So that's just par for the course. It's been a weird campaign because we haven't really had a Prime Minister versus an opposition leader. We've had two untried opposition leaders, one of them weighed down with disappointments of the Rudd government. So in a sense, I think Julia Gillard's had the worst of two worlds. She hasn't had the safety and the gravitas and the seriousness that comes with incumbency, the trustworthiness, but she is associated with a few of the bungles, or the perceived bungles. And by contrast, Tony Abbott has looked pretty prime ministerial. So, that's why it's been a weird campaign, and we really don't know what's going to happen.
One last question before we throw back to the studio. We often hear talk of a hung parliament before election day. Do you think there is, this time, a greater chance that might be a reality?
There's a greater chance tonight than there was 2007 or 2004. I mean, it's still only a slim chance. I think hung parliaments are always over-anticipated. It's a good story. It allows people to have a guess at the result without leaving themselves to being too far wrong. So it's a good prediction to make. There's an outside chance, but I would say, you know, there's only a 1 in 5, 1 in 10 chance of a hung parliament tonight.
Okay. Peter Brent from The Australian, thank you for that. I hope you'll join us here on the tally room floor later on during the night.
I certainly will, John.
Good on you. Thank you, Peter. Now back to that Peter up in the tally room studio for Sky News. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, John. I think for the benefit of our viewers, we should probably mention that poor John doesn't get the ear feed that I've just, when I've just thrown to him, he speaks off the cuff on that, and it's not that he's got a personality vacuum and didn't want to engage in the joke. He can't hear that. We'll have a great deal of fun with that during the course of the night, I'm sure. Mike, can I ask you, state issues, normally at a federal level, state issues seem to be kept out of the fray, I think. Most commentators tend to like to say that state issues and federal issues, voters delineate between the two, but there's a real sense in this campaign that the unpopularity of the New South Wales Labor government, the unpopularity of ASHLEIGH up in Queensland are bearing down on the federal government's vote. Do you think that's a fair comment, or is that an excuse by federal MPs for the Labor Party about the fact that they're not doing that well?
No, I think it is a factor, and normally it isn't. I mean, I guess I've been adherent to the view that people do, as you say, usually distinguish between federal and state elections. You know, they know they're voting for a completely different level of government. But Christian mentioned earlier Victoria in 1990. It's a good example. The government there, Kerner government, was so much on the nose that it rubbed off on the federal government. And Andrew Peacock picked up a swag of seats. I think it might have been 9 seats or something, which actually gave him a majority of the national vote, even though he still lost the election. And there's no doubt that in New South Wales, the appalling state of the state government is a factor, and perhaps to a lesser extent in Queensland. I mean, there are other factors at play in Queensland, but you know, the classic example is the bright idea that the Labor Party came up with for the Parramatta to Epping railroad announcement.
Gee, who came up with that? I mean, I can't believe that they wanted to merge state and federal issues on a particular point like that, the way that they did it. It blew up in their face, and badly, didn't it?
Well, sometimes it's a good example of the Labor Party being too smart by half, you know. I mean, there are these sort of smart operators who know a lot about politics, but sometimes don't think further than
tomorrow,
the next opinion poll.
Nikki, you were saying when we were off camera about the large number of undecided voters and what impact that might have on the election. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I was talking to people today who were saying that they thought there were as many as 12% still undecided, and I thought it was interesting the other night after the forum in Brisbane, where they had 200 people there, and there were still 50 people after that event who are undecided, and you sort of think, what are they waiting to hear? What else are they expecting?
Maybe they needed a slightly longer campaign. 5 weeks isn't long enough. We could have stretched it out a bit further.
Or a longer forum, but you know, it just showed to me that there were a lot of people out there who were still waiting for something to make them
Do you think in this campaign that undecided equals unimpressed? Like, you know, it's not. You don't get the impression it's people weighing up two wonderful options,
just
wondering.
Uninterested or disinterested.
Yeah, I think people. Well, I think people have a very good right to be unimpressed after the two sort of the few insights we've had into what both leaders stand for at both the community forums. It's all about don't risk Abbott from Gillard, and it's all about from Abbott. Don't risk another 3 years of bad government. It's so unbelievably
there's
negative.
There's not a lot of inspiration there, as you say. I mean, Julia Gillard's argument is don't risk Abbott, don't risk Abbott. I've never heard Abbott's name mentioned in one sentence so many times. And on the other side, you've got Tony Abbott saying don't risk Gillard. We don't want more of Gillard because it's more waste.
This is a trend. We've been seeing this trend of undecided voters mount over the recent elections. Now, funnily enough, 2007 was the exception. The number of undecideds at the last moment fell. That's because we all thought Kevin Rudd was going to be a fantastic Prime Minister, ironically. Now, all of that could flow through to a really, really large number of last-minute voting decisions this time round.
If we've got a number of last-minute decisions being made, Mike, that's got to favour the momentum that the coalition built up in the last 2 days, doesn't it? If people are genuinely undecided at the last minute and there is this feel that the Liberal Party are going well, that helps them, does it? Or is it more just that the Labor campaign is that people are scared, they don't want to risk Abbott, he's got a low personal approval set of ratings, so therefore they stick with what they know?
Well, this goes into theories that people have been arguing about for years. Is there a bandwagon effect? Possibly. People think, oh, you know, I had my doubts about Tony Abbott.
I want to back the winner.
Yeah, I had my doubts about Tony Abbott, but he's, you know, other people think he's doing all right. Perhaps they're right. That could be an effect. But it's hard to say whether it's a bandwagon effect or perhaps something's happening today that people are balking at the ballot box and saying, Tony Abbott, you know, now that I think about it more seriously, perhaps he's not such a great option. I think a measure of the disillusionment that we were talking about, or at least the undecided vote, is the degree of disillusionment. And I noticed both the Galaxy poll earlier in the campaign and the news poll that we published today in the Australian shows that most people are voting more because they dislike a party than they like them. Well, I think in the case of news poll, it's less than a majority, 49% or something are voting because they say they like the party they're voting for, and about the same proportion are saying they're voting out of dislike. That wasn't true in the last election.
And on the other side of the undecideds, there are a lot of undecideds, but there were also a lot of pre-poll votes, Greg. I mean, in some seats they're saying 20% of the vote was coming in as pre-poll. Who does that favour? Because on the one hand, Gillard went in ahead in the polls and popular, but she had a terrible middle part of the campaign with all the leaks and destabilisation. Who wins out of a 20% pre-poll, Labor or Liberal?
Well, I think that you've hit the nail on the head. It all comes down to when that pre-polling occurred. If it happened, Julia Gillard will be hoping not too many people voted in the second week of this campaign. It was one of the worst weeks I think you could say any political party's had in a campaign in this country. I would think, I know Labor people are quite confident because they think the campaign after that second week has recovered. The pre-polling won't reflect the boost that Abbott got the last few days. I think the consensus view is that Labor's taking a bit of comfort from that, but I think it's up in the air. It'll all come down to when those votes were cast.
And we're going to be thrown back to Sydney shortly and David Spears, but first, Christian, the Greens. It was discussed before by John Kerrison on the floor. The Greens, are they definitely going to pick up the balance of power in the Senate, and are they a real chance of picking up Melbourne in the lower house?
I'd be amazed if they didn't win the balance of power in the Senate. Melbourne, there's a lot of momentum there, but we've got to remember that seat isn't just Brunswick Street. It's still got some really old-fashioned working-class areas, some really high-migrant, non-English speaking background areas. It's not just a lot of inner-city trendies with organic lattes. There's some really old-fashioned working-class people with nasty tower blocks there. So Kath Bowtell's still a chance, I think.
OK, well, I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here in the Sky News studio in the tally room. We're going to be on all night, and we're going to have John Kerrison roaming on the floor, talking to each of you. Mike Steckity, Nikki Sava, Greg O'Mahony and Christian Kerr, appreciate your company, and no doubt we'll talk repeatedly during the night. We're now going to throw to David Spears in the Sydney studio for Sky, where I think you've got the pre-poll results for us. So this is going to be absolutely fascinating. Can't wait to hear it. David, what have you got for us?
We do indeed. Peter Van Onselen, thank you. And we'll be crossing back to you throughout the night in the tally room in Canberra. But tonight here at the Sky News Centre, we are going to be assembling some of the best political minds. We've got two former leaders, Bob Hawke and John Hewson, joining us a little later this evening, as well as many of the key players in politics today. Tony Burke, Eric Abetz, the New South Wales Premier Christina Keneally will be here, as well as the National Senator Fiona Nash. Two of our key strategists, Bruce Hawker and Graham Morris, will be along shortly as well. But right now we are going to get into what is likely to happen tonight with our exclusive Sky News exit poll, which we've commissioned from Ozpoll. And joining us, John Armitage from Ozpoll. John, first of all, the two-party preferred result that you have found today in 30 key marginal seats where you've polled, what is it?
51% to Labor, 49% to the Coalition. A couple of things important to say about that. Firstly, this is a batch of seats. It's a bit tougher for Labor, a bit better for the Liberal Party, so that'd be more like 52-48 nationwide. Also, we've always got a couple of percent margin of error on these things, so really all I can say is the poll says a narrow Labor win, but the range of possibilities are still narrow Labor, Conservative victory through to probably comfortable Labor.
This is important because everyone's seen the News poll today, the Nielsen poll today, the Galaxy poll today. They're all national results. Your poll is an exit poll of what people have done and then told you or told your pollsters which way they voted, but only in those marginal seats that are in the balance. So this would indicate that Labor wins tonight.
That's right, you know, notwithstanding that little margin of error we've got there, which can throw every poll out. But we actually asked people, have you voted yet today? If they said yes, we said, how did you vote? If they said they hadn't, we said, have you definitely made up your mind? So this is not a poll about how are you going to vote so much. Vast bulk of people had already voted before they answered this, so they were telling us how they behaved as opposed to how they intended to.
All right, let's look at the primary result that you found. What did that come out at?
Well, we've got Labor there on a primary vote of 42%. Coalition, so that's Liberal or National, depending on which seat they were in, on 45. Greens on 9, and all the others there on 4.
That's a lot higher primary vote for Labor than we've seen in recent weeks in many of the polls.
Well, I think that's probably about, you know, those undecided voters and Green and minor party voters that sort of end up sort of going back to one of those major parties.
It's been sitting at 14 or 13%, and you've got it dropping back down to 9% on the day.
Yeah, look, that seems to be a reasonably common pattern where the Greens will overinflate in polls beforehand. They tend to expect that to happen. It is reasonably common. We could still have them doing a little bit better than that. I would also expect a reasonably big state variation in that too.
All right. Now, the parties will be watching us very closely right now. This is the first exit poll that's been comprehensively released, and I do want to look at, because everyone will be interested to know what seats you targeted, what seats you polled in. I'm just going to grab our toy for the night, the iPad, and have a look at what seats in particular you focused on. Now, I think you weighted a lot of them in Queensland and New South Wales, where
just because that's where the marginal seats are.
Exactly. Well, let's start in Queensland then and have a look at some of the marginal seats, and you can tell us where you did this survey. The key seats in the north of Queensland are Leichhardt, Herbert and Dawson. Were those 3 seats in the poll?
Those 3 are in the poll, yes.
OK, and then when we get closer to Brisbane, the key seats, Longman, Dixon, Ford, were they all in the poll
yes,
as
all
well?
In the poll as well, yep.
OK, and finally in Brisbane itself, we've got the key seats here, Bowman, Bonner, Petrie, Brisbane, Moreton perhaps. Which ones were in the poll there?
We haven't got Bonner, we've got Bowman and Petrie in that list.
Bowman
there.
and Petrie, OK. Then in New South Wales, in the regional areas, the only marginals there, Eden Monero.
Yeah, we've got that.
And none others in further north, but in and around, well, closer to Sydney. All right, Macquarie and Macarthur, Robertson and Dobell.
Yeah, all of those in.
All of those were in, OK. And then in Sydney itself, the key seats in Western Sydney are Lindsay, Greenway. We also have the key seat of Bennelong too.
You had Lindsay and Bennelong, not Greenway.
Not Greenway, OK. The 2 more marginal ones that are more likely to change hands. So, and then in the rest of the country, apart from those 2 key states that we're going to be looking at tonight, where did you?
Well, we had a look at Bass and Brad and the sort of perennial sort of possible switches down there in Tassie. Also Boothby and Sturt. I should have said the Tassie one's held by Labor.
Yes, so the whole state held by Labor, but Bass and Braddon in the top of the state are the 2 that we're going to be looking at.
Boothby and Sturt in South Australia, which are both quite close.
Okay,
and both
so
held by the Liberal Party.
Those 2 there in Adelaide.
They're really quite marginal, both of those, and they're in our sample. Northern Territory, we had Solomon.
Yep.
WA, Hasluck and Swan.
OK. Well, and what about in Victoria?
Oh, sorry. In Melbourne, we've got, well, won't be on that one. We've got Deakin, Latrobe and McEwen. Now, 2 of them won't be on that list.
Let's
there.
just bring
Deakin,
it up.
Yeah. There you go. Corangamite on the bottom left there. That's one that's in, sort of back of Geelong,
yep,
sort
down
of
near,
seat.
this one down near Geelong. Latrobe?
Yes, Latrobe.
OK. And McEwen, which is just further
sort of
to the north. That's it there,
McEwen. That was that one that was in court for ages, and 8 votes in the end decided that in favour of the Liberal Party, and Fran Bailey retiring there.
And just to remind us, in Western Australia, you said none of the regional seats, but in Perth, let's zoom into Perth, Swan and Hasluck.
Yep.
That's a notional Labor seat now, isn't it?
Yeah,
after
notionally.
Redistribution, but a Liberal member there, and Hasluck. So you've picked out the most marginal seats here with this survey, and it's showing Labor 51 to the Coalition 49. Sky News Chief Political Reporter Kieran Gilbert, what do you make of that result?
Well, David, if Labor, and I'm sure many of the Labor strategists are watching tonight, they would have been hoping for this result, with about 10% of the population, maybe a bit more, being undecided going into election day. They were hoping that they would break their way, and according to Ozpoll today and our exit poll, it seems that of those 30 marginal seats, those undecideds seem to be breaking their way. Now, the other interesting point there is the fact that the Greens vote has come down from about 13-14%, according to some polls, back down to 9%, and that's what we see at elections traditionally, and it's happened again, according to your exit poll. But we should caution, obviously, there's always that margin for error in these polls. The other thing I would add to that caveat is of the seats, we've got very different stories in different states. So of the seats in Victoria, McEwen, Latrobe, Corangamite, we might be seeing, and Boothby in South Australia, the two in Tasmania, we could be seeing a very, very different number to what we might see in Queensland and New South Wales. And we know there are enough seats there alone within that battleground territory that could cost Labor the election. So while the numbers are promising, encouraging for them, I don't think they should be popping the mullet
absolutely not. Absolutely
We've actually got some variations, and I think we've got a bit of a smaller sample, but be a little bit careful about it. But this poll's indicating big swing in Queensland away from the government, but a lot softer in New South Wales. So,
Right.
so you know, a bit closer in New South Wales. But all those others collectively heading toward the government. So that's where it's evening out. And the problem with that from the government's point of view is a big swing to Labor in Bass and Braddon doesn't do any good to you at all. 3 or 4% in Queensland, you lose just about all of those seats we listed.
Yeah.
So that's the risk in there, is that you could get your 2PP right on the two-party preferred vote right on this poll. That could be correct, or something close to it. And if the individual seats don't go consistently, then you can get a quite different outcome.
But if out of those 30 seats, Labor wins a 51% vote, or even a 50% vote if they get half of those 30 seats, they get 15 of those seats, lose 15 of those seats, they're going to scrape back in.
Law of averages, if you get 51, you usually get up, but sometimes you can get 51 in those seats and lose.
Not get up. All right, well, it's still pointing to a nail-biter. Let's look at some of the issues that you asked as well. Now, Kevin Rudd, of course, has been a dominant theme in this election campaign, and you've asked in this exit poll, who would you have voted for if Kevin Rudd was still leader of the Labor Party? What's the result there?
What we had was that people said, and I think this is a great question to have a look at, people said that they would, the 8% more people said that have been in the Labor camp than were in the way they told us that they voted. And you can see their coalition 3% worse off, Greens 4% worse off. So that's interesting, isn't it? That's sort of saying that pile and the Green pile would have actually been happy to vote for Labor, and the others -3. I know that doesn't add up. That's just rounding why that looks like there's 10 going one way and 8 the other. But I think the thing about this stuff is, of course, that Kevin Rudd now having, I was going to say retired, that's not quite how it happened, is it? But Kevin Rudd being off the scene, he hasn't been there for sort of, 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of negative criticism. So he's been able to sit there as the sort of elder statesman almost. And so I think it's a really interesting question to ask. But whether that's what really would have happened or not, I think you've got to be careful about making that assumption.
He has become something of a martyr over the past 5 weeks, and who knows? It's a
Liberals
hypothetical
talk glowingly
question.
about him now. I don't think they'd be doing that if the results had
Tony
still
Abbott,
been
of course, wanted him to step down well before he was pulled down by his own party. So, but look, an interesting result nonetheless, and one I'm sure if we do see a tight result tonight, people might come back and have a look at that question.
Well, Kevin will have a view about the accuracy of those things too.
You also asked when people decided to vote. Was it a late decision for most people?
Look, a little bit later than usual, but this is amazingly is not that uncommon. Look, sure, we get the 52% say that they've decided before the last month or so. But as you can see on the screen there, those figures, 11% of people say they've decided today, and another 11% say they've decided in the last 3 days. I suspect with this, when I do a lot of qualitative research, people say to me, I haven't decided. But as you talk to them, they've already got quite fixed views about certain issues and certain things that are important. And I think a lot of that's about people not going through the process of considering things actively until the last minute when they're required to. The other thing that all of us forget, we all care about elections, we're election junkies. Stacks of people don't care much.
No.
There's a whole lot of people, probably less watching Sky News tonight right now, but if the general public out there, stacks of people don't care much. They're not thinking about it. They walk up to the booth and go, oh, I'll go this way or that.
Now, the big issues. You asked what were the most pressing issues for voters in making up their mind whenever they made it up. What's been the dominant issue?
Well, non-surprisingly here, we had health topping the list. I'm not sure if we've got that on the screen for me to look at there, but had health at the top of the list.
Yep.
This is very common for that to be the case. Then we had the economy. I'm not sure if we're going to get those exact numbers in a minute for me, and the third one was cost of living issues. And I'm going to be struggling without the info to go further there. But it's quite common to get health at the top.
Surprising is to have health, economic management, and then cost of living.
It looks like on the screen now we might have some of the other statements we asked. Not sure if you wanted to proceed to those and perhaps come back to those issues in a moment.
Tell us what these are. These are...
Okay, what we tried to do there was say, what is the essence of the message that both the Labor and Liberal camps have been putting out, both the positive message about themselves and the negative message about their opponents, and tried to say to encapsulate that in a sentence and say, do you agree or disagree with that message? And this is just a way of testing, in a sense, the effectiveness of the campaign. So the first one here is what you might call the Labor negative. This is that Tony Abbott will hurt families, bring back work choices and make cuts to health and education. 49 agreeing, 45 disagreeing with that. That
close.
sort of, yeah, it's close, but they can be. But it's a bigger gap than that voting thing. And that's not unusual because you could accept the proposition but not necessarily mean that you're going to vote against your team for that reason.
But it indicates that Labor's negative message worked to that extent.
Yeah, well, 49, 45. I mean, it's better than not. And now we're back to the
we're going back
big
to the
issues. Right.
All right.
We'll come
back to some of the other messages then in a moment.
So
you were saying the issues.
Well, I was right on cost of living being third, but it was actually equal third with education. And then asylum seekers coming in there, 17% of people rating that in their top two issues. We gave them two choices there.
Okay.
I think certainly those top four, pretty common. Look, the mining tax at 15% came in sixth, but 15% of people said there's in that top one or two issues. For an issue that was obviously gigantic there for a while, but one side would argue has been set aside, the other would say was still alive. A lot of people mentioned that issue still.
And population growth, where did that...
Well, population growth only came in at 5%. That's quite interesting because in a lot of
It was all we talked about for a week and a half at the start of the campaign.
I suppose in a list of 9 other things, where have you got to put that? I think what happens with population growth is it speaks to a whole lot of other issues. When I talk to people in qualitative research, it talks to jobs, it talks to pressure on the environment, it talks to things like water and other issues like that, and of course it overlaps with that asylum seekers issue as well.
Kieran, what do you think of the issues that have come out as the most important in this poll?
Well, the population growth, I mean, that you would expect it's a fairly dry term, but it was all about asylum seekers and population growth spilling into issues of congestion and so on in Western Sydney and other areas around Brisbane. That was what that message was all about from Labor. I'm fascinated to see the number about Tony Abbott, though, because that does seem to show that negative campaign did bite. 49% agreeing with that assertion that Tony Abbott would bring back work choices and hurt working families. And the other number that I found intriguing as we drill down here is the 11% who decided today. Now, that was the figure that we thought would be the case. Labor yesterday, Julia Gillard campaigned, mentioned the word risk dozens and dozens of times in the last 24 hours, hoping that a large percentage of that 11% did balk. Maybe it worked.
Let's look at some of the other messages, if we can. Labor's positive message about keeping the economy strong, protecting your rights at work and improving health and education. How did that go?
This is of all the 4 statements we tested, that sort of 2 positive and 2 negative, one being for each side, 53% agreed, 40% disagreed. So that positive message was the strongest of all of the messages that we tested. And at 53-40, it's obviously not an overwhelming win, but clearly there you've actually got more people agreeing with that than voting for the Labor Party, not only in primary vote, but
and it's an important number, John, given the issues poll that you looked at previously with 37% saying the economy is their top priority. That there is an important number for Labor.
Economy, health and education. That statement had economy, health and
education. Let's look
at
the Liberal Party's negative and positive messages, starting with the negative message, which was essentially that re-electing Julia Gillard and Labor means more waste, more debt, more taxes, and a higher cost of living. How did that go?
Yeah, well, that people agreed with that, 47 to 46, so incredibly tight. I thought that the Liberal Party was really disciplined about sticking on to that message throughout the campaign, and 47-46 agree. So that was actually that wins by 1 point, whereas a Labor negative won by 4.
So Labor's negative campaign worked better than the Liberals' negative campaign.
The idea that Labor was a risk, the idea that Labor was a risk was less bought than the idea that Liberals were a risk.
Tony Abbott being a risk. And the
Not
Liberals,
by much. These are tight numbers.
Yeah, they are tight numbers. Yeah. And finally, the Liberal positive message that the Liberals will end wasteful spending, pay back debt, stop new taxes and stop the boats. We heard this a few times.
Yeah, well, absolutely. People did agree with that 49 to 45. The fascinating thing about it is that although it was their positive message, it had some negatives in it. If you're at the bunting at the polling booths today, it's will end Labor's waste and pay back Labor's debt. And so it was actually, although it was a positive, it was their promise of what they were going to do, it was couched in negative terms. And so whilst they got 4% more agreeing than disagreeing, Labor had that sort of 13% gap on their agree-disagree.
Two more numbers I want to look at. The gender gap. A lot was said, particularly at the start of this election campaign, about how women and men would vote with a choice of a female and a male in this election campaign. How did it go?
Well, it's not as big as I expected it to be honest. It was 52% of women said they were going to vote Labor to 48% of men. 48% said
that seems to be on the issue of ending waste, paying back the debt. Is that right, or is that
I think that's actually our two-party preferred vote. There's just a bit of a sort of something, an incorrect bit of information left on the top there. So that's meant to be two-party preferred vote. So 3% gap where women were 3% more likely to vote
52% of women voted Labor.
Two-party preferred terms, that's right.
And 48 women voted coalition.
Yeah, and for blokes it was 51-49 in favour of the coalition.
51 of men voting for the coalition.
Yeah, so I mean that's a noteworthy gap, but it's not gigantic.
No.
It's not any bigger than we often see. A little bit bigger than the usual 1 or 2, but the 1 or 2 or 3, it's about in the range of what we usually expect to get.
And just finally, the better Prime Minister, do we have that figure there as well? The better Prime Minister figure?
Not sure if we've got that coming up. Labor was...
Here it comes.
Yeah, so Julia Gillard 12 points up on that, 48 to Julia Gillard, 36 to Tony Abbott, which if anything is probably a little bit bigger than we've had in the other polls that have been published in the lead up to the election. So quite a big gap. Well, I say quite a big gap. Look, an incumbent Prime Minister would usually be at least that far ahead. To be comfortably...
she doesn't really have that, does she? I mean, she is in name, but in terms of the broader consciousness, electoral consciousness, she hasn't had enough time to establish that incumbent Prime Minister, to be around to establish that authority.
She's really looked like a candidate for the whole time she's been the Prime Minister, rather than being able to be Prime Ministerial and do some of those big things that a Prime Minister can do. So I actually think that's a pretty big gap in that context. But for a Prime Minister versus an opposition leader, that's actually a worryingly small gap. You can lose elections when you get in that sort of range. You want about 50-30 with 20 undecided usually is a comfortable sort of range. Much better than that usually means they get returned very easily.
Well, they are fascinating results, John Armitage, and we'll hold you to account for them whichever way the result turns out tonight. But that does give us an indication of just how close things are likely to be this evening. We appreciate your time on that.
As you're holding me to account, I'll just remind you of that margin of error one more time.
Absolutely. And Kieran Gilbert, thank you very much. We'll be talking to you throughout the night as well. Of course, you're going to be heading off to Tony Abbott's campaign headquarters for this evening.
We'll my skates on, absolutely. Thanks,
absolutely. Get over there. We'll talk to you very soon. In the meantime, let's go now to Julia Gillard's function for the night, which is at the Convention Centre in Melbourne, and ASHLEIGH Gillon, Sky News political reporter, is there. ASHLEIGH, we've been talking about the Sky News exit poll, which we've just released, and it's showing Labor ahead in 30 marginal seats, 51 to 49. That's close, but better news for Labor than perhaps we've seen in some of the recent days' polling.
Oh yes, perhaps that's a bit better than Labor might have been even expecting after the sort of panicked approach we saw from Julia Gillard, reverting back to those very negative attacks about work choices and the other risks that she says Tony Abbott would bring as Prime Minister. But look, this race has been so tight from the beginning of the 5-week campaign period. I know that during the 2007 campaign, well, following the leaders around for that 6-week period then, we really got a sense that voters were ready for a change, and the feeling feeling by this stage was that, yes, Kevin Rudd was the clear winner. This time around, being on the ground for 5 weeks, every day, hitting 2, 3, 4, 5 marginal seats and speaking with voters, there hasn't been that clear sense of how this will turn out. A lot of the voters we've been speaking with seem to be uninspired by either leader, and it seems that it's really just down to the wire even at this point this evening.
So, ASHLEIGH, what's going to be happening there this evening? Just describe the room for us. Will it fit a large crowd there tonight, and will they be on tenterhooks for the next couple of hours, do you think?
Yeah, look, we're at the convention centre, so this is a huge room here. Of course, at the moment, it's really just journalists and the workers from here setting up lighting and doing audio checks and the like. But we're expecting Labor supporters to start rolling here in the early evening. Julia Gillard, of course, won't arrive here until much later tonight, either when we know a result or if she's just ready to say that we don't know a result and we won't know one tonight. Now, we understand that Julia Gillard's family has flown in from Adelaide, so she'll be watching the results roll in with her family and her partner Tim this evening. Of course, she started the day in Western Sydney. It's interesting to note that Tony Abbott, of course, also went out to Penrith to the seat of Lindsay. So both of the leaders heading to that one seat today shows you just how tight the race must be in that seat in particular.
All right, ASHLEIGH Gillen, thank you. And we'll come back to you throughout the night as well. Let's go to where Tony Abbott is going to be tonight. That's at the Four Seasons Hotel in Sydney, and Sky News political reporter Caitlin Raper is there. Caitlin, the exit poll, as we've heard, is pointing to a close result, but better news for Labor. They're ahead 51-49 in those marginal seats, according to the AusPoll exit poll. How do you think that will go down where you are?
It's certainly some cause for concern for the coalition camp, David. Of course, many thought that Tony Abbott went into the last few days of this campaign with the momentum. He himself told Sky News that yesterday. It would, of course, be some concern for him this afternoon. I'm at the Four Seasons, as you said, here in the #1 ballroom, where behind me there is a sea of Liberal blue. The final preparations underway here, getting everything set up with Tony Abbott's supporters and friends and family expected to arrive here over the next few hours. It's understood he and his wife Margie and their 3 children will stay at their family home on Sydney's northern beaches until a result is near, and then he'll come down to this event and address the crowd. As ASHLEIGH mentioned, though, he was out and about in Sydney today. First of all, in his own electorate of Warringah with his 3 children, his daughter Francie flying back from overseas to be with her father on this day. They voted there. He manned the sausage sizzle, and then it was to the seat of Bennelong in Sydney's north, where he campaigned with high-profile candidate John Alexander hoping to reclaim that seat for the coalition after Maxine McHugh snatched it away from John Howard in 2007. And finally, as ASHLEIGH mentioned, Tony Abbott then went to Sydney's west, where he campaigned with the coalition's candidate Fiona Scott in the seat of Lindsay. As we mentioned, a very tight contest there. He reaffirmed his party's commitment to those core 4 values to pay back the debt, stop the waste, stop the big new tax and stop the boats. That last one, of course, key in the seat of Lindsay, where border protection has been a big issue. All right,
Caitlin Raper, thank you, and we will come back to you as well. Let's go now to Kevin Rudd's camp for the night, if we can call it that. Of course, he won't have as much hoopla as the 2 leaders in this race, but a lot of attention on how he's going to react to whatever happens tonight. And Sky News political reporter David Lipson is there in the seat of Griffith in Brisbane. David, paint a picture for us there. What's going to happen? Will Kevin Rudd be appearing later in the night, and does he have much of an entourage there with him?
Well, the room here at the East Leagues Club isn't that big. It's nowhere near as big as the rooms of the leaders, but it is a brand new room. In fact, it's only been open for about a week or so. As you can probably see behind me, there aren't any actual Labor banners up as yet, but we'll wait and see whether they make an appearance a little bit later on in the evening. Of course, Kevin Rudd had taken the Labor brand off much of his campaign pamphlets and brochures and posters and the like, but you would imagine there'd be a few more balloons balloons and the like later on. Now, this room will be packed with Labor supporters, but really they are supporters of Kevin Rudd. So, as you were saying, it will be really interesting to watch the mood of the room here in Coonadoo. And even if Julia Gillard does get up, as our exit poll suggests, I'm sure there would be many people in this room thinking that perhaps it should be Kevin up on that stage accepting victory, if that is indeed what happens. Now, as for the seat... Sorry,
I'm sure he wouldn't have minded seeing that exit poll result, particularly on the fact that 8% more people said they would have voted for Labor had Kevin Rudd been there. Hypothetical question, of course, but I'm sure it must give him a wry smile.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And everyone will be really closely monitoring his reaction tonight, his words tonight. Certainly, he's in no danger of losing this seat. It's a very safe seat for him. 12.3% is the margin. But we'll also be watching carefully what the swings will be, either towards or against him. Just a few weeks ago, I was chatting to a few elderly ladies here in this very suburb, and they said that they were so disappointed by what had happened to Kevin Rudd being dismissed so unceremoniously, so swiftly, that they weren't going to vote for Julia Gillard. They weren't going to vote for Labor. I don't think they quite realised that this was probably going to hurt the person they liked, Kevin Rudd, but we'll wait and see how that all pans out later
I don't think at the end of the day he wants to see Labor lose tonight by any stretch. David Lipson, thank you, and we'll come back to you as well. From one leader to another one former leader to another former leader, and that is Malcolm Turnbull. Lee Hatcher is in his Sydney-based seat of Wentworth. And Lee, you were talking to Malcolm Turnbull a short time ago. He's not in any danger tonight. How would you describe his mood?
Oh, mood very buoyant, very relaxed, very Malcolm Turnbull. We're at the Eastern Suburbs Rugby Union Club, David, in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, just off the coast and between the harbour. It's probably one of the better political parties to score here tonight for campaign 2010. There's going to be free beer and wine flowing for the campaign workers of Malcolm Turnbull, lots of them, and they're assorted hangers-on around here. It's a seat that he holds with 3.9% margin, and I would expect, certainly based on the campaign that he's run and the events of the last few months, he will probably gain more votes and gain a greater hold over this seat. It's been described as one of the greenest and one of the gayest seats in the nation. The smallest electorate in Australia, some 30 square kilometres, 100,000 voters. Very much suited to Malcolm Turnbull's socially progressive form of liberalism. Of course, a couple of months ago, he wasn't going to stand for the seat. Once he was knocked off from the leadership by Tony Abbott by one vote. Abbott consolidated the Conservative base of the party, left Malcolm Turnbull with nowhere to go really, and ended up in April announcing that he wouldn't recontest Wentworth. Then there was such a groundswell of support and pleas to Malcolm Turnbull, both from within the party but especially within Wentworth. Please reconsider. He did some weeks, 3 weeks later, and announced that he would stand. And you have to say, since then, his behaviour has been, as a former leader, knocked off by the man who would now become Prime Minister if the Liberals get their way. His behaviour politically has been impeccable. He's been very supportive of Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott, even at the launch, referred to Malcolm Turnbull, his predecessor, as his friend. He's also been very busy, not only in his electorate. In a small electorate, it helps. He busses everywhere. He tweets all the time. He's got 25,000 Twitter followers, but significantly he's also been kind of rebuilding his power base within the party by going and helping as a star candidate. He is. Many of his colleagues interstate, crucially in Queensland, but also in South Australia, Western Australia, Victoria and out the west of Sydney.
All right, Lee Hatcher, thank you. Of course, if this is going to be a very close election result, we may be here for a long time this evening, and we may be focusing very much on what's happening in the West. There are 2 or 3 key battleground electorates in Western Australia. Hasluck is one of them that Labor is hoping to hold on to. Sky News' Michael Willisey is there in Perth, in the seat of Hasluck. Mike, what's going to happen there tonight, do you think? OK, Mike can't hear us, I'm told. We'll come back to Mike. Quickly to another battleground electorate of Lindsay. This is in Western Sydney, around Penrith. Nina May is there. Nina, what's the sense that you get today? Labor figures yesterday were saying this one was gone. What do you think today?
This is going to be a really tight contest, David. I spoke to both sides. Both sides are feeling this is a 50-50. It's a knife edge. It's simply one that's up in the air. You can't call it at the moment. But if the coalition is going to win government, and if Tony Abbott is going to wake up as Prime Minister tomorrow, the coalition is going to need to win seats such as Lindsay. A 6.3% swing is needed for David Bradbury to be unseated by Fiona Scott. Both sides, you'd have to say, would have to be extremely nervous today to see what happens. And this is going to be a really interesting one to watch too, David, to see how state issues reflect on the national stage. Of course, it was only 2 months ago, it seems like an eternity, doesn't it, that the Penrith by-election was held here, and that saw a 25% swing against Labor for the Liberal candidate to take power here. So it's going to be really interesting to see what certainly happens tonight. Both sides extremely anxious, you'd imagine, to see just what way the tables turn. Both Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott saw Lindsay as crucial enough that they spent this morning, election day morning, in this electorate, both trying to shore up those last-minute votes because they both really need them.
All right, Nina May in Lindsay. It will be an interesting seat to watch. Thank you for that. And quickly, let's check in with Mike Willesee, who's in the Perth seat of ASHLEIGH. Mike, what do you think is going to happen there tonight?
Well, talk about a knife-edge seat. I know there are a few of them in this election, David. ASHLEIGH held by Labor by a margin of less than 1%. The big question, will the curse of ASHLEIGH, as it's become known, strike again? Since this seat was first contested in 2001, the sitting member has lost every election. So in each election, the sitting member's been kicked out. Tony Abbott has said if he's going to become Prime Minister, Liberals have to win this seat. Julia Gillard famously flew all the way here on Wednesday just to campaign. Flew over 6,800 kilometres to do about half an hour's campaigning with Sharon Jackson, the Labor member. As I say, it blows in the political wind, less than 1%. It's going to be close.
Certainly is. Mike Willesee, thank you, and we'll come back to you, of course, I'm sure, throughout the night, and particularly late in the night as well. You're watching Election 2010 on Sky News.
Live around the nation, broadcasting around the world, and live globally on the net at skynews.com.au. This is Election 2010 on Sky News.
You are watching Election Night 2010 here on Sky News. This is going to be the place to be. We are going to have some of the great political minds, former leaders joining us a bit later as well. The former Prime Minister Bob Hawke and the former Liberal leader John Hewson. But now let's welcome our main panel for this evening. Let's go from left to right, or should I say from right to left, I'm not too sure. But Graham Morris, a former Chief of Staff to John Howard, joins us, one of our regular political strategists on Sky News. The Liberal Senate leader, Eric Abetz, Fiona Nash, Nationals Senator, the Minister for Agriculture and Sustainable Population, Tony Burke, the New South Wales Premier, Christina Keneally, and Labor strategist Bruce Hawker from Hawker Britain. Thank you all for joining us. I want to start with your predictions. An hour before the polls close in the eastern states, and we'll write all these down and come back and see how you've gone. Bruce, who's going to win and by how many?
I think Labor will hold on, but I don't think they're going to do it by many seats. My guess is it'll be in the 4 to 5 seat range, but it will be an absolute majority. I think we'll see a
4 or 5 seat majority.
Yeah, that's my guess. But it is a guess, really. Anything could happen, as we know. Labor could win with a sizable majority. I don't think so. We could really be in a hung parliament, but my best guess is 4 to 5 seat majority.
Premier, what do you think?
I think Bruce is pretty spot on there. I do think that Julia's performance as leader, as Prime Minister, has been fantastic, and I do think a Labor victory tonight, which I agree with Bruce, is the most likely outcome, will be due to her hard work on the campaign trail. It likely is to be somewhere between 3 to 5 seat majority.
Tony Burke, are you as confident as your Labor colleagues there on the margin and the win?
I'd love to be saying what they're saying in a few hours' time. Don't know whether we will be. Certainly today you've had 3 polls come out. One at 52, which would have us winning. Your exit poll at 51, which would mean we wouldn't know tonight. And the news poll at 50, and 50% would deliver a coalition victory. So I think it's, with the information we've got, for anyone to be making a call like that is really brave.
So too close to call.
It's going to. I would be amazed if we have a victory speech from anyone by 11 o'clock tonight.
All right. Interesting. Fiona Nash, what do you think?
I'm not as confident as the other two on the end as far as they're going. The last couple of days, there's been such a change. The last 48 hours, the swing sort of to the coalition, the feeling on the boost this morning, people really strong. Lineups like I've never seen before, actually. So I think probably like Tony, too close to call.
I heard this as well from MPs I've spoken to today, that a lot of people were out early to vote. What does that mean?
Well, it obviously means they've made up their mind and they really wanted to get in there and have their say. Didn't want how to vote cards. I've been up in Page, probably around 50% of the booth I was on didn't want to how to vote from anyone. They knew exactly what they were going to do. What that is still too close to call.
No, Erica Betts, what do you think's going to happen?
Too close to call, but win, lose or draw for Tony Abbott. This has been bringing the coalition back from what, a 28% primary voter within an ace of potentially winning or actually winning, and I think that is a tremendous record for Tony Abbott, irrespective of the result, and I think the coalition has got a lot to be thankful for to Tony Abbott and the way that he's run this campaign.
All right, but a too close to call.
Oh, too close to call.
3 too closest to call, and 2 for Labor. Graham Morris, what do you reckon?
Well, it is extraordinary. Yeah, this time 12 months ago we were wondering whether the coalition was going to lose another 10 or 20 seats. And here we are wondering how many seats Labor's going to lose. Look, it is patchy. Even this morning in Victoria on the polling booths, the Labor Party had these big posters which was vote for a Victorian for Prime Minister. In Western Australia this morning, the Liberals were jumping up and down and saying, don't let Labor milk Western Australians. You know, it is really quite patchy. I can find, David, 11 seats that I think will fall tonight. I don't know about the remaining 6 that are required, or 3 or 4 to get a sort of a hung parliament. But I think we're going to have a terrific night. And I'm actually hoping that we're still here at about midnight looking at the West Australian seats to see who the hell has won this.
We may well be, but it sounds like 6 you reckon that have gone, definitely. But the rest would all have to go Tony Abbott's way for him to win.
I think about 11. I can find 11 that will fall.
Will definitely fall.
The other ones,
yeah, all right.
Sure.
We'll go through and have a look at which ones you think. But I'm told we had our own exit poll. There are a couple of other exit polls coming out as well right about now. We have a 9-network exit poll. It's coming, I'm told. What is it? Can you tell me what it's saying? 52% to Labor, 48% to the coalition. So this is the 9 Networks exit poll. Again, an exit poll that focuses on what people have done rather than what they say they're going to do. There it is now, 52% Labor, 48% to the coalition. This is the 9 News exit poll. I don't know exactly whether this was in how many marginal seats. Ours was in 30 key marginal seats, very heavily weighted on Queensland and New South Wales. So I'm not sure if this is just a national poll or particularly targeting marginal seats. But again, some encouraging news for Labor, Bruce.
It is, but it's just that encouraging. I don't think we can place too much reliance on anything until we actually see the real numbers come out. You see, we may be seeing significant swings against Labor in, say, Western Sydney and Queensland, but the reports from Adelaide and Melbourne are quite positive, so you're going to have to offset that if there is a swing to Labor against any swing against them in the more northern states. So it's going to be a very strange election. I hope it's not quite as exciting as Graham wants it to be, but it could be a long night.
But for your viewers, David, in 2000 and whatever it was, 2001, I walked into Kirribilli House at about this time, and Jeanette Howard, Mrs Howard, said, Graham, go and cheer up John Howard, because he just got the exit poll and it looks as if he's lost. You know, 4 hours later he'd won again.
And he was up giving the victory speech.
Sometimes exit polls aren't right.
Can be wrong. Let's not forget that a valuable lesson. Well, OK, well, let's look at where you think this is going to be won and lost. And Queensland, of course, is going to be in great focus tonight. These seats from the top end down, Leichhardt around Cairns, Herbert around Townsville and Dawson around Mackay. Tony Burke, can Labor hold on to... This Herbert seat also is a notional Labor seat after redistribution, but still was won by the Liberals at the last election. Can Labor hang on to those seats?
You'll find, and this is where we say a nationwide swing is not occurring. In Queensland, a statewide swing is not occurring either. You will find across the seats that you've got there significant differences between Leichhardt and Dawson, for example, significant differences between Capricornia and Flynn. And if we end up with an incredibly close result tonight, it'll be the seat in purple that'll be deciding who's in government.
That's right, Bob Catter's big seat here of Kennedy. Julia Gillard spent a lot of time in Townsville with your Labor candidate Tony Mooney there. So you're hopeful that he might be able to cling onto that seat?
This is where, while there's been Queensland has been difficult for us, there's no doubt about that. In Herbert with Tony Mooney, we're running someone who has been a former mayor, very well known in the area, and that the sort of local base that you only get after many, many years of holding public office in that way. We also have no coalition incumbent. So those issues put together give us an opportunity in Herbert, which you might not otherwise think would be happening.
Erica Betts, if you had Peter Lindsay still there, you'd be feeling a bit more comfortable about Herbert. What do you think's going to happen?
There's no doubt Peter Lindsay was a great member. We encouraged him to run last time and he held the seat for us. Herbert will be more difficult for the coalition to win with Peter Lindsay retiring, but it is one of those seats that we are hopeful of winning to win government, albeit I think Leichhardt and a few others might be more likely.
And then if we go further south, still in Queensland, I think this one's going to be fascinating to watch tonight, Longman. Now, this is a seat where the Liberals have the youngest candidate running.
I campaigned with Wyatt Roy. He really is a pocket rocket and a fantastic campaigner.
Can he win this seat tonight, do you think?
And he did exceptionally well. And look, I hope he wins. I'm not going to make a prediction on that, but I think he's in with a very real chance.
Bruce Hawker, what do you think about Longman?
It's very close. It's 1.9, I think, is a swing that's required. It could go either way. Obviously, Labor's had a few issues there in recent times, but I think they've been putting a lot of work into Longman, and I wouldn't be surprised if we hold there.
But you'll probably, well, Peter Dutton will hold on to his seat of Dixon, which has been redistributed into a national Labor seat, and Ford will probably be lost as well for Labor.
Well, Ford's very much on the cusp as well, and you've seen a lot of effort going into there too. I think it's unlikely we'd pick up Dixon, but you don't know. I think the challenge for Labor is really just to hold the seats in Queensland.
And then in Brisbane itself, you've really got a stack here that are going to be fascinating to watch tonight. Bonner is going to be very difficult for Labor to hold on to. Brisbane and Petrie might be, well, a challenge, but more comfortable for Labor. We'll see. If you're in trouble in those two seats, it's all over.
The caveat, though, David, that Brisbane did lose some, or picked up some strong Liberal booths as a result of the redistribution. Suburbs like Clayfield are now, and Ascot are now part of the seat of Brisbane. Having said that, Labor's held Brisbane through the good and the bad times, and I do think it would be surprising if we lost it.
But you've got Arch Bevis facing a former Liberal MP, for Petrie, Teresa Gambaro, running in that seat, so her name recognition will be strong there.
The other on that part of Queensland, David, there's something that we need to take into account on the southeast corner of Queensland. We look at changes in boundaries. There's something very different going on in that part of Australia. You've got the highest rate of population growth that you have going on anywhere in the country. So you can look at what the margins were 3 years ago. Even if the boundaries hadn't changed at all, you have a significantly different population 3 years down the track. And some of the advantages of incumbency don't apply when you've got that sort of change in population.
It's a big unknown. Well, the other battleground tonight that we're all going to be watching is, of course, Sydney and what's going on in Western Sydney in particular. Now, Lindsay is held by Labor at more than 6%, but is at real danger of being lost to the coalition tonight. So too Bennelong, Maxine McHugh's battle with John Alexander there. And there's another seat here, Greenway, which will be interesting to watch. It's had a redistribution and is now a 5% Labor seat. But this seat of Lindsay, of course, has been in great focus during the campaign. Christina Keneally, why is Labor in such trouble, and is it because of your government?
Well, can we first talk about this notion that somehow Western Sydney is under assault? You've got a seat there, Lindsay, which has been held by the Liberals more often than it's been held by Labor throughout its history.
Jackie Kelly held it for 10 odd years.
Absolutely. And if you look there through Western Sydney, the great swathe of seats, Parramatta, Chifley, McMahon, Fowler, Werriwa, they're all very much being held quite strongly by Labor. You've got two seats, Lindsay and MacArthur, which both seats, and then of course Macquarie, which you can debate whether or not that's truly Western Sydney. Certainly a portion of it can be considered that.
This is Macquarie here, more around the Blue Mountains.
Yes.
And MacArthur, you were talking about, is around the southwest of
Now those
Sydney.
3 seats are marginal seats. They've been held more often by the Liberals than by the Labor
But
Party.
are you saying there's no backlash against Labor in Western Sydney?
No, what I'm saying is we need to knock on the head this notion that all of Western Sydney is under assault. What we have are 3 seats, which are swinging seats by definition. And if you look at the history of those seats, they're not always held by Labor. In fact, they're more often been held by our opponents.
But see, Labor should hold seats in Western Sydney. I mean, this is
Well, we do hold seats. We have, on the most generous notion, you could say there's 16 seats in Western Sydney, and a more restrictive, you could say there's 13, depending on how you wanted to describe it. You know, we hold, of those 16 seats, we currently hold 14 of them. The reality is we are in swinging seats like Lindsay, like MacArthur, and like Macquarie, in situations we are often in a federal election.
But in this seat, in Penrith, we saw the state by-election there with a massive, unprecedented, what was it, 25-26% swing against your government in that seat. Is the state issue hurting Labor federally?
Well, first of all, the swing that we saw in Penrith was similar to other swings we've seen in by-elections in recent years. By-elections never favour the incumbent government, and they particularly don't favour the incumbent government when people are forced into a by-election by the bad behaviour of the incumbent member. It's something we absolutely acknowledged going into that by-election, and in fact that was a swing and a result that we forecast we would see there.
Fiona Nash, has the anti-Labor sentiment in Western Sydney been overstated?
No, I don't think it has. I mean, you've only got to look at the Penrith by-election itself, and while the Premier says obviously there were issues with the incumbent there, I mean, they were out to change their minds in that seat, and you've only got to look at the candidate there. I mean, he's a fantastic candidate. And but they really, I don't think the Premier can say, oh, it's all okay, it's hunky-dory, that's how it normally is. There's a very serious response in Western Sydney to Labor government, state and federal.
Tony Burke, do you agree?
Look, we've got some challenges in Western Sydney. There's no doubt about that. To describe it as an area that's always been Labor heartland, I think the people of Western Sydney would take a bit of offence to that because they do regard themselves as a community that's willing to swing each way in different votes.
But you are having trouble there at the moment.
Yeah, no.
And whose fault is that? Is it your fault? Is it their fault?
Oh, look, when you have...
Not on the coalition.
What I'm getting at is the state Labor government's performance hurting you?
People are smart enough to vote on the issues for the election that's in front of them. And when the Penrith by-election happened, the New South Wales government took it on the chin and said that was about state issues. Whatever happens tonight in any part of Australia, whether things go our way or go the coalition's way, we've all got to say people were voting on the issues that were on the ballot paper. And I think it gets condescending when we start to argue that somehow people are mixed up and don't know what they're voting for.
Bruce and Graham, we've debated this issue of state and federal overlap after every state and federal election. Bruce, I know your strong view is people do distinguish between the two, but is there any bit of overlap in this one?
Well, there might be a bit, but I think the big issues in Western Sydney are population pressure. Sydney is growing and the west of Sydney is growing very, very rapidly.
And is giving this guy here the title of Sustainable Population Minister enough to calm those fears?
I think it goes a long way when you've got Tony Burke looking after those sorts of issues, for sure. But I do think...
Stay on this theme for a while.
I do think that... I think there are a lot of issues out there. Clearly, the issue of asylum seekers did play and does play in Lindsay. We've seen David Bradbury's gunboat diplomacy off Darwin in the gunboat. I mean, he's sending a pretty clear message there that he's got real concerns about making sure that we do have proper border security.
Yeah, it was a good stunt, wasn't it, Graham Morris sending David Bradbury up to Darwin, or was it too much?
Well, I think a lot of people were saying, why has the Prime Minister got a sort of a political poodle? You know, everywhere the Prime Minister went, there went the member for Lindsay. Now, I thought politically really clever, but at 6.3%, you start thinking, well, blimey, how spooked is the Labor Party?
And the fact that she was there last night and again this morning.
Yeah, she opened election day in Lindsay at 6.3%. Look, people can tell the difference between state and federal elections, but the word Labor does not smell real good out in Western Sydney, and it's full of young families, and they now find they've got negative equity in their homes, they're struggling financially, and they're looking for somebody to belt. It just so happens that federal Labor has put their hand up first and said, belt me.
Yeah. Now, Bennelong isn't Western Sydney per se, but it does have a bit of a celebrity contest going on with Maxine McHugh, who won, had a great win against your old boss, John Howard, last time around. But, of course, there was a lot of focus on that seat during the campaign in 2007 because it was John Howard, because he was under threat by this former TV presenter. There hasn't been perhaps as much focus during this campaign, but she is facing another celebrity candidate of sorts in John Alexander. Is Bennelong going to be picked up by or returned to the Liberals tonight?
Well, I think Bennelong is one of those that will or could fall tonight, whereas a couple of those that are a bit easier might not. And it's sort of a let-down factor. You know, we have this feeling of expectations when Labor came in of some good things would happen. And it was right across the country. Here we go. And there was sort of dashed expectations, and I think in Bennelong it's magnified because everyone thought that their new member Maxine McHugh was sort of going to be a star minister and be in the media every day. They saw her every day during the election, and all of a sudden, in their mind, she's disappeared.
Yeah.
And I think Maxine's in trouble tonight.
Now, elsewhere in New South Wales, there's really, a couple of seats around Sydney that will have to keep an eye on. Eden Monero is what's called the bellwether seat. This is the one that has gone with the government of the day since 1972. Now, Mike Kelly, the Labor member, is up against a well-known former Liberal staffer in David Gazzard, but it sounds to me like Labor will hold on there tonight.
I have watched this one all the way through, and I suspect, we'll see tonight, but I think the union movement, the public servant union particularly, has bought this seat.
What do you mean by that, with advertising and...
$750,000 spent against Gazzard, essentially saying Tony Abbott is going to cut the hell out of the public service, and David Gazzard agrees with him. It's been a very nasty
You
campaign.
and I live in Canberra. You can't get away from these TV ads, it's true. They've been thick and fast on the TV
6 and
screens.
7 a night, big money.
Now, well, Bruce, is that one going to be kept?
Well, I think, even though it's a very marginal seat, I think that Mike Kelly will hold, and I suspect he'll hold quite well. And if Tony Abbott had specified where the cuts were going to come in the public sector, maybe the ads wouldn't be so effective.
Now, the other one we should have mentioned, north of Sydney, Robertson, the seat that Belinda Neal held. She lost a pre-selection battle there. Now it's Deborah O'Neill and Darren Jamieson for the Liberals. But it's held on, Tony, 0.1 of 1%. No chance of holding that tonight, you wouldn't think?
Look, a fortnight ago, we would have been well behind. There's been significant momentum over the last week in that seat. Whether it gets us over the line or not, I don't know.
All right, well, that'll be interesting. Other states are important, of course, for all of our viewers watching around the nation, but they won't be as decisive as Queensland and New South Wales. Nonetheless, Victoria does present some opportunities for Labor tonight. You've got the seat of McEwen here, which is held on a very wafer-thin margin. I think it's 0.01% or thereabouts by the coalition, and the sitting member, Fran Bailey, leading at this election. Can Labor pick that up? Christina Keneally, do you think that's one they can pick up?
Look, there is certainly a great sense of optimism in Victoria, and certainly I think that when you've got a retiring member, anything is possible. It's one they could pick up that could provide a buffer elsewhere.
We'll come back to that in a moment. We do have the seat we were talking about earlier, Longman, in Queensland, which is one where the Liberals have this young candidate, Wyatt Roy, running. Selena Edmonds is there. Let's cross to her now. Selena, what's the feeling on the ground there?
Well, of course, it's a very mixed feeling here, David, because as you said, Wyatt Roy is only 20 years old and he's making this run for Parliament that would make him one of the youngest people to ever be elected if he is successful to represent the people of Longman. This seat is centred really around Caboolture, and I'm here in Moray Field at Wyatt Roy's party, and this is where he will be celebrating tonight if indeed he can become a giant slayer, if you like, because it would be John Sullivan that he would unseat. Now, Mr Sullivan holds this seat with a 1.4% margin, and of course it hasn't been an easy end to the campaign for him. He did have that gaffe this week where he was on a live radio forum and criticised the parents of a boy who had been unable to get a successful diagnosis for their son, and he criticised their parenting skills. He was forced to apologise. The Prime Minister was also forced to defend Mr Sullivan as well. So it hasn't been an easy end to the campaign for him. But you've also got this element that Wyatt Roy is 20 years old. He has been described by one of my colleagues this week as the Doogie Howser of politics. He looks very young, and it's really a question of whether people are going to give him their vote. I have to say, though, having spoken to Wyatt Roy prior to the election and during the election, when you speak to him, he's really very convincing about his passion to represent the people of this area, David.
All right, Selena, thank you, and we'll come back to you throughout the night as well. Let's quickly go to ASHLEIGH GILLON, who's with Julia Gillard this evening. Well, that's where she will be this evening. Ash, what have you got for us there?
Yeah, look, I think it'll be quite a few hours before Julia Gillard shows up here. At the moment, it really is just the travelling journalists who have been labouring away following Julia Gillard around the country for the past 5 weeks. And of course, we're seeing here at the convention centre that, you know, balloons are being put up and the Labor paraphernalia is around the room with all the TVs on and all the journalists eagerly awaiting some sort of news as the votes come in. Of course, here in Victoria, things are looking a lot more positive for Labor than like in Western Sydney and New South Wales, as you've been all discussing on the panel. Here you mentioned McEwen is one Labor's hoping to pick up. Another interesting seat, of course, the seat of Melbourne, which the Greens have their eye on. Of course, South Australia also looking good for Labor. Coincidence or not that Julia Gillard calls both of these states home, growing up in Adelaide and then moving here to Melbourne for university. So I guess it helps in elections to have two home ground advantages, something she'll be hoping comes through for her tonight.
All right, ASHLEIGH GILLON, thank you for that, and we'll come back to you throughout the night as well.
Live around the nation, broadcasting around the world, and live globally on the net at skynews.com.au. This is Election 2010 on Sky News.
Well, let's continue our look around the country at what is likely to happen tonight before we get to some official results, which should be coming through in about an hour from now. We were looking at Victoria. McEwen, north of Melbourne, is one that's going to be worth watching tonight. But also, when we get closer in and around Melbourne, the seat of Corangamite, a Labor seat, but with a strong Liberal candidate there, a former ABC broadcaster, Eric Abetz. How confident are you about picking up one there tonight?
I think if we win tonight, Corangamite will come our way. Sarah Henderson's been an outstanding candidate. I campaigned with her twice during the campaign, and be it on presentations, public debates, on each and every occasion, Sarah Henderson was a clear winner. Do you need to win this seat
to win the election tonight?
I've got a funny feeling that we will need to win it, because, as we know, it's patchy all around Australia, and I would think in Victoria, Corangamite, a potential win, and too close to call Latrobe and McEwen, which are, in fairness, potential losses to us. Not that I want to countenance it, but trying to be as objective as I can.
To offset those two likely losses,
I think they are seats of concern for us.
Yeah, well, McEwen we were talking about up there, but Latrobe there around the Dandenongs.
Yeah, Jason Wood's been a great member, great marginal seat
But he's going
campaigner.
to struggle tonight, isn't he? I mean, the margin's tight, 2.2% roughly. Graham, do you think that one's going to fall Labor's way tonight?
Look, I think in about 2 hours' time, if there's a net nothing out of Victoria, in other words, the coalition might lose one and win one, then I think we're going to have an exciting night. This morning in Latrobe, it was patchy. The sort of green area was very, very strongly green, so those preferences are going to go to the Labor Party. But the reception in the other part of the electorate was actually very good. So down in Victoria, they're crossing their fingers. They've actually run a good campaign in Victoria, but the polls and everything show that the sort of hometown girl thing with the Prime Minister is hurting the Liberal Party.
Bruce, is that what you're gathering as well throughout the day?
Yeah, I think Melbourne is our best shot in this election. And there's even probably hopeful talk about Dunkley, which is a 4% swing seat. I don't think that's really within the range, but if they're talking seriously about
this is Dunkley down
in
here.
the south there, then there is a real prospect, I think, of picking up McEwen and Latrobe.
Melbourne is going to be fascinating to watch as well. Not in play for the coalition, but from my mail, Labor is on track to lose this to the Greens. Tony Burke, do you think that's going to happen?
Well, let's start on the basis the only way it gets lost to the Greens is because of a Liberal preference deal with the Greens. The big green gain, the big green gain that there's an opportunity that they may well make tonight is off the back of Tony Abbott's preferences.
What's wrong with the preference deal with the Greens, Tony?
No. I'm just saying that's not the message you would have heard from the coalition during this campaign. You've heard a lot about preference deals, but not about the fact that the one gain the Greens might make in the House of Representatives is off the back of a Liberal Party how to vote.
David, can I respond to that? There was no preference deal. We made a decision to allocate preferences, but not on the back of a deal, whereas Labor and the Greens made a deal right at the very beginning of the campaign, and then when we in Tasmania in fact highlighted that preference deal towards the end, the Labor Party went screaming to the Electoral Commission to complain, only to have the complaint dismissed, might I add. But I think the Labor Party trying to accuse us of doing a preference deal with the Greens is an indication of that they may have been hurt by their own preference deal.
It was an act of love.
Their actual deal with the Greens.
You're saying it was an act of love, Eric?
No, there was no deal, unlike with you.
But why would you
actually engaged in a marriage with the Greens, if you want to use the love analogy. We didn't. We made a decision in relation to a particular seat that that's the way the preferences ought to be allocated, but there was no national preference deal as the Labor Party did with the Greens.
You must think you can form a government with Green support, Eric?
No, because in that seat, if Labor were to win it, it would not be a seat that we would rely on, and say either way it won't assist us, but
So
we
why
may...
do it? I'll give you a good tactical reason, though, that because of that sort of arrangement or non-deal,
exactly.
It meant that the Labor Party has spent an absolute fortune in Melbourne that they have not been able to spend in the other marginal seats. And that tactically is sensible.
Let's continue our whip around the nation, painting the picture before we get some results. In South Australia, it's really only two seats that are going to be potential changes tonight. Sturt, Chris Pyne's seat, and Boothby, Andrew Southcott's seat. What's going to happen in those two? Bruce Hawkett, first to you.
The word on the ground actually is that Boothby looks quite encouraging, but we'll just have to wait and see. I think people say, look, we could well be ahead in Boothby on the night, but we have to wait and see where the postals and absent votes go.
And Sturt, you get the sense that Labor MPs would love to knock off Chris Pyne. What are they going to tonight?
Pyne is a very tough campaigner. I think you've got to give him credit for that. And there is no preference deal between Labor and the Greens in Sturt.
Correct.
And so there will be presumably a bleed of preferences away from
Will there be much
Labor.
of a Greens vote in that seat?
Sorry?
Will there be much of a Greens vote in that seat, do you think?
I think there will be, yeah. There will be. I think this is going to be a Green election, no doubt about that.
This, Erica Betts, is Julia Gillard's other home state, if she can have two home states.
I just want to know which one is the real Julia's hometown and which one is the unreal
one where she was brought up,
hometown.
where she went to school and went to uni, or went to school. The statewide vote is very pro-Labor in both South Australia and Victoria. So what's going to happen, do you think, in these two seats tonight?
I've got a funny feeling that we will be having to fight a bit harder to keep Boothby than we will to keep Sturt, albeit the margin in Sturt is lower than Boothby.
Is that because
from the
Chris Pyne's a tougher campaigner?
Not necessarily so, but there is no doubt Christopher Pyne's a very good campaigner, but it's the Julia Gillard factor in Boothby that I think may count more against Andrew Southcott than it should do. He is a very effective member, very capable contributor, but how do you deal with, you know, the mum and dad of the Prime Minister living in your electorate and all the attention being focused on there? So
Yes.
that is Andrew Southcott's difficulty tonight, but we're still hoping he'll hang on.
Now, every seat Labor can gain tonight, and there probably won't be many of them, it does make the job that much harder for the coalition in states like Queensland and New South Wales to win. Let's have a look at Eric Abetts' home state of Tasmania. All Labor. These two seats, Bass and Braddon in the north, are the ones that are most marginal. But, well, Eric Abetts, is there likely to be any change there tonight?
Look, I would like to think there would be, and you would expect me to say this, but trying to be as objective as I can. The individual campaigns of our Liberal candidates has been, I think, by far outclassing the Labor Party's individual
But
campaigns.
It's not going to be
but
enough
having
to win a
said
seat,
that, I think the Julia Gillard factor, the NBN factor and a few others will make it very difficult for us to pick up a seat in Tasmania. I hope I'm wrong, desperately hoping I'm wrong, but I've got a funny feeling it will be tough. But once again, let's wait and see.
Any change there, do you think, tonight, Tony Burke?
You can cherish this as the moment that I agree with Eric Abetts on something in the panel tonight. Tasmania is NBN in ways that the rest of the country is not dealing with, simply because the rollout, they're seeing it, it's active, and the impact of broadband on those regional areas, particularly through Bass and Braddon, is extraordinary.
And they're giving it away, might I add, at this stage, the NBN, so the Tasmanians are benefiting from it without any cost to them to be connected
All right, we
up.
might get into an NBN argument a bit later on.
That is a great thing for Labor to have
Let's
done.
not forget my hometown, Graham's hometown, the ACT. Two seats there, Canberra and Fraser. They're not going to change hands tonight. That's all rock solid. The Northern Territory, though, the other territory, Solomon. Now, this one, everyone I talk to says it's impossible to predict what's going to happen there tonight. It's held by a narrow margin by Labor, but does anyone have any confidence in saying which way that's going to go?
Look, I think if we're going to win tonight, from a coalition point of view, Natasha Griggs will get over the line in Solomon, and I think that could well be an important litmus seat for us.
But on that one, Eric, everyone can only go by gut feeling. The Northern Territory seats, because of their defence population and their Indigenous population, your normal methods of polling are incredibly difficult. You've got very high turnover, you've got people moving around a lot. You just don't get the sort of data as to how it's tracking in Solomon that you get in the rest of the country.
Makes it very difficult to predict. In Western Australia, firstly the regional seats, they're unlikely to change, but I think O'Connor's going to be interesting to see how Wilson Tuckey fends off the Nationals candidate in what they call a three-cornered contest, Fiona Nash. How confident are the Nationals of knocking off the Liberal warhorse, Wilson Tuckey?
It's tight. Tony Crook's done a very, very good job over there. Obviously off the back of Brendan Gould's success with his royalties for regions at state level. There's a real hunger out there in regional Western Australia for that royalties for regions type of approach, and from everything I'm hearing, it's fairly tight. I mean, Tuckey's got a huge margin. I think it's nearly 13%, but it's certainly going to be one to watch tonight.
And we'll see if the two of you are barracking for the same team later tonight too, as we see those results.
Wilson, he was good to me on agriculture.
Okay. In Perth itself, well, Hasluck is going to be fascinating. Swan is a notional Labor seat, but coalition likely to hold on to that. Canning also, which is just to the east there, but, well, firstly on Canning, Bruce Hawker. Is Don Randall in any danger there for the Liberal Party?
Well, Alana McTiernan is the Labor candidate there, former minister in the Gallup and in the Gallup government, and she is a very formidable
She delivered
candidate.
a rail link there that's
Yeah,
pleased the voters, it seems.
Yep. And she's popular, and the word on the ground there is that we're doing very well. Now, once again, it's a seat that requires about 4% swing to us, so it is a bit optimistic to think that it's going to come our way. But if there is an out of the blue sort of a result, it'll be Canning.
It'll be Canning, all right. And when we do get down to the later hours, because they're 2 hours behind in the west, that could be fascinating to see how she goes there. But in Perth, the seat of ASHLEIGH, first of all, we have Mike Willesee there in Perth in the seat of ASHLEIGH. Mike, tell us about the seat. Where is it? What's the demographic, and what you think is going to happen there?
It's an interesting one, David. ASHLEIGH forms an arc around the eastern side of Perth, taking it very much a mortgage belt area. It encompasses Perth's airport, a lot of light industrial, less than 1% is the margin, 0.9% held by Sharon Jackson. As I mentioned earlier, this seat has changed hands at every time it's been contested, so that fact wouldn't augur very well for her. Ken Wyatt's interesting story, good story, an Indigenous candidate, and if he is elected to the House of Representatives, will become the first Indigenous Australian to do so. There are around 4,000 or 5,000 Indigenous voters in ASHLEIGH, and it's a seat where about 1,000 votes could make a difference will make a difference as to who wins the seat. Anecdotally, there is an enormous amount of excitement and pride amongst the Indigenous population. I spoke with Ken Wyatt a little bit earlier. We will have him a little bit later for a talk. He's still working very hard, but I think quietly confident. Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear from him later on, Mike. Thanks for that. Just around the panel on ASHLEIGH, which is going to be fascinating. Graham Morris, Ken Wyatt's been a strong candidate for the Libs there. Is this one they can get?
Yeah. You know, if West Australia is still in play at the end of the night, it is going to be exciting. I think there's some funny expectations, though, that somehow or other, you know, the mining tax means that the Liberal Party is going to sweep the entire state. Well, the Liberal Party did magnificently their last election, you know, against all sort of odds and against the Kevin juggernaut. West Australia held. So to get a couple more seats is a really extraordinary effort. But tonight, I suspect they just might get 2 more.
Yeah, Tony Burke, would you agree with that? Do you think? What do you think? How do you think the West is going to play out?
When Graham says 2 more, you're counting Swan as a national Labor seat, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
I think with redistributions, whenever we count a seat that's changed hands on the pendulum but has an incumbent for the other side, I think realistically I still keep that on the other side. Yeah. I keep the incumbent on their side
Swan,
of the pendulum,
which is
I think, to be
the
honest.
one in the middle here, Steve Irons, he'll hang on to that.
Well, it'll be hard. I don't agree with Graham's initial premise if we're still waiting for the results to come in from the West. On every reading that I have this election, Western Australia will be giving us the final call on who runs Australia. And I don't think we can underestimate the importance of Western Australia in this election. Between ASHLEIGH, Swan and Canning, we will be watching that right through to a very late hour tonight.
Sharon Jackson, the member for ASHLEIGH, won it in 2001, lost it in 2004, won it in 2007, so we just don't want that pattern to continue.
Well, that's the painting the picture of how the nation is looking and what we're likely to see tonight. I'm just being told we'll cross quickly to Helen Dally, who's in the seat of Bennelong in Sydney, which we were talking about earlier, where Maxine McHugh is in a battle with John Alexander there for the Liberal Party. Helen, where are you in Bennelong, and what's likely to happen there tonight?
Yeah, hi David. This is the West Panthers Bowls Club at Epping, and the guys have just come off the bowling green. They've been bowling all afternoon. We've been listening to the chook raffle going here, and so it's now the scene where Maxine McHugh, the sitting member for Bennelong, is going to be having her, I guess, whether it's a party or a wake tonight. She's not here at this stage, but all the media are here because this really is one to watch, David, as you've no doubt been talking. It was the scene of a huge upset in the 2007 election when first-timer Maxine McHugh, who a lot of people had known was the ABC broadcaster, she won the seat and took it from the sitting Prime Minister John Howard, who had held it for 33 years. As I said, a major upset. Her margin now is much narrower than when she won it. It's now 1.4%. Strategists say there's about 1,200 votes in it, but this time could be different, David. She, unfortunately for her, may well be a one-time MP because this time there are another couple of huge issues that are at play in this seat. One of the big issues here, which we've been talking about for weeks in Western Sydney, is the issue of transport. And of course the decision, the announcement by Julia Gillard to announce the Epping to Parramatta rail link, it just might not be enough to woo these voters in this seat. But also one of the big questions that is worrying Labor strategists, there's a very large Chinese vote in Bennelong. About 16% of the voters are Chinese, and there's also a large Korean community as well. Now, the Chinese voters, Labor strategists are very worried that they are entirely peeved. They think the Labor Party has politically assassinated their Mandarin-speaking Prime Minister, and they did not like that at all. So that is a really big issue here. And so whether that's going to play out and exactly whether the Chinese community who did support Maxine, whether they will support her again tonight is a big unknown. And David, one of the issues that came up in 2007 was the doctors' wives, a group of voters who supposedly were supporting Kevin Rudd because they liked his promises on action on climate change. Well, Labor also believes that they may well be voting Green this time, and that the Green preferences even may not be enough to get Maxine across the line. Now, on the other hand, very briefly, the Liberal Party has put up one of its star candidates, John Alexander, who is the current tennis commentator, and he also has been one of the greatest Davis Cup players that Australia has produced. He has run a fairly low-key campaign, but in the last few days he really has come home strongly. So whether it's a vote against Maxine for some of those sins of the Labor Party, both state and federal, and the way Kevin Rudd's been treated, or whether it's the campaign and the likeability of John Alexander, but this really is going to be very close, and Labor strategists were very depressed in the last few hours, and Liberal strategists are very confident.
All right, Ellen Daly, interesting stuff. We'll cross to you, of course, throughout the night and see how that battle for Bennelong comes along. You're watching Election 2010 on Sky News. And we have two channels, of course, that you can watch tonight. We're on 601, and shortly we will be joined by Bob Hawke and John Hewson, along with the rest of our panel here tonight. But there's also on 602 Peter Van Onselen and his panel in the tally room in Canberra. We're going to cross to Peter now to see what is happening there and what the assessment is, as we see a couple of exit polls come in pointing to Labor narrowly being in front, but a cliffhanger in store for tonight. Peter.
Well, David, it won't surprise you to know that our panellists here on the left and the right from the Labor Party and from the Coalition are continuing to spin mercilessly. Both are trying to claim underdog status. When I was talking to them beforehand, both were claiming that they thought they were going to fall just short. So at the moment, with not long to go before booths close, at least on the East Coast, it seems that, that those few extra votes by being the underdog seems to be the order of the day. I might start by introducing the panel. I'll go on the left. Viewers right, appropriately on the right for viewers. We've got on the far right of the panel Senator Scott Ryan. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Peter.
Closest to me, we've got Senator Mitch Fifield, also a Victorian. Thanks for your time as well.
Good evening, Peter.
And to my right, to the viewers left, closest to me, we've got Paul Howes from the Australian Workers' Union. Paul, thanks for your company.
Thanks, Pete.
And on the far end of the panel, on the left, we've got Andrew Charlton, former economics advisor, senior economics advisor to Kevin Rudd. Thanks for being here as well.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, I guess what we should do before we go any further is just make sure you two don't come to fisticuffs. I think that's probably the best way to start. Andrew, you were Kevin Rudd's senior economics advisor, one of his close confidants within his office. Paul Howes, you were one of the so-called faceless men that resulted in the knifing, if I can put it that way.
He is the face.
He is the face, that's true. But the so-called faceless men, I dispute that. But here you are, you were involved in removing Kevin Rudd, that's fair to say, so was a lot of the party. Would Kevin Rudd have done any better before we see the results starting to come in today? I'll start with you, Andrew.
Look, I think it's impossible to say. You know, clearly...
impossible to say or don't want to say?
Well, look, I think the truth is that Kevin Rudd would have faced some headwinds that Julia Gillard would not have faced, and Julia Gillard would have faced some headwinds that Kevin Rudd would not have faced. I think clearly Kevin Rudd wouldn't have had a leadership change to navigate. Clearly, Kevin Rudd might have had a slightly easier time selling and identifying with Labor's achievements and records. On the other hand, he might have had a more difficult time on some issues that Julia Gillard has done very well on. So it's genuinely impossible to say, in my view.
Paul, what about Queensland specifically? I mean, if Labor holds on, it'll be because you've insulated the swing in Queensland. If you don't hold on, it'll probably be because Queensland voters desert the party in droves. Now, will that be because Kevin Rudd is no longer Prime Minister, or are there other issues at stake in your view?
Well, we can't talk about hypotheticals now, Peter. It's 10-6 on the East Coast. It's, 10-4 on the West Coast.
Anyone that's going to vote would already be lined up. They wouldn't be watching us.
Labor was well behind the polls before the leadership change. Clearly, we still have the underdog status right at this moment. when we see the results, we'll be able to dissect those results and see what factors may have changed. But I agree with Andrew. I mean, there's many strengths that Julia Gillard brings to the table. Kevin Rudd had many strengths as well. I certainly think you know, the Liberal Party have been very successful in their spin about the Labor Party being in turmoil. Nothing could be further from the truth, but it was a devastating and it's a very successful tactic in states like Queensland.
Well, with 10 minutes to go before polls close on the East Coast, and a lot longer than that, it has to be said, in states like Western Australia, where there's still 2 hours to go before polling day. I'm going to give the the Liberal spin merchants a chance to respond to that in a moment. But we should note, and viewers on the Sky News main channel have noticed with that exit poll, that it shows that there are actually quite a significant number of voters that would have actually voted for the coalition, according to that exit poll, if Kevin Rudd was still leader. Now, we will debate that at some length when we go back to channel 602, but we won't hash over it now while we're here. Mitch, let me come to you. What do you think has been at play here? Is this a backlash against state Labor governments that is sweeping up the federal Labor government in states like Queensland and New South Wales, or does it go deeper than that?
Oh, look, I think there's no doubt that the Labor brand has become totally toxic in Queensland and New South Wales. Voters are sophisticated. They can differentiate between state and federal. I think we all know that. But there's no doubt that Labor as a brand has become severely tarnished, and we're seeing that in the polls.
So you don't think the Anna Bligh factor has been a major issue in Queensland as opposed to that Labor brand you speak of?
Oh, look, it has been a factor, but I never want to underestimate the intelligence of the voting public. They can differentiate, but the Labor brand, New South Wales, Queensland, has taken a hammering.
Senator Scott Ryan, what in particular has caught your attention in this election campaign, and what will you be watching out for closely this evening as the results come in?
Well, Peter, I actually think there's a lot that resembles the 1990 election here. This is definitely going to be the closest we've seen since 1990, which was decided by half a dozen seats. And I think Mitch here pointed out the backlash in Queensland and New South Wales. It's not because of state Labor, it's because of what they recognise in federal Labor that so annoys them about state Labor. That's exactly what happened when the Victorian Liberal Party won 9 seats in 1990 and almost got the Liberal Party over the line, and it came down to half a dozen seats, and I think that's what we're going to see tonight.
Andrew, you were Kevin Rudd's senior economics advisor. You've got a PhD in economics from Oxford. Economics was something that became a Labor strength in this campaign, according to the opinion polls, in terms of voter perceptions about which party was better able to manage the economy, even which leader was better able to manage the economy as well. How do you explain that? What issues were at play there?
I think it's very simple. I think it's the record that the Labor Party had in government was extremely strong, navigating Australia through the global financial crisis, delivering stimulus, which several commentators around the world have described as one of the best designed stimulus packages in the world, and ultimately producing an economy which was the fastest growing of all the major advanced economies, the only one not to go into a recession, and a smaller impact on unemployment. So I think people could look at Labor's record, and in addition to that, they had a comparison between Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, where Tony Abbott really didn't have a plan. He had very little to say on the economy except an empty slogan about debt, which wasn't supported by the facts.
So how then are you going to explain Labor losing if that's what happens tonight?
Well, I think economics has been and will be a strength of the government.
So what will have been the weaknesses?
I think Julia Gillard pressed that home very strongly. I think the weaknesses are that Tony Abbott really managed to escape a lot of scrutiny in this campaign. I think Tony Abbott, everyone expected him to fall apart when the going got tough, and the truth is, he didn't really fall apart, but that's because he never got taken out of the packaging.
Well, look, I agree with that, and I'll ask our Liberal senators about that in a moment. But first, Paul, something that really caught my attention is that this rhetoric or this idea that the Labor Party was a bad government really became the permeating rhetoric. Now, whether you agree or disagree with it, it became an accepted narrative. Now, why is it an accepted narrative? As far as I'm concerned, 3 key issues: environment, health, and industrial relations were the campaign issues of 2007. Now, you guys said you'd get rid of work choices. You did that. No one can complain about that, surely. The second issue of the environment, you said that you would bring in an ETS. Well, you tried, but you got stifled by these guys, particularly in the Senate. Third issue, health. Well, frankly, I think health was oversold to what you delivered, but nevertheless, you did deliver a health reform package, whatever you think of it. Why was Labor unable, frankly, to get that message out as clearly as it probably should have in this campaign?
Well, if you look back and when you dissect the campaign, there's no doubt that we were on message and doing very well in that first week. No one can deny this fact. There's malicious leaks in the second and third weeks destabilised the campaign. We lost the message. Now, Mitch was talking earlier about voters being able to differentiate between state and federal politics. Clearly, the Liberal Party strategy in New South Wales and in Queensland has been to confuse state and federal issues. Bunting, Liberal Party bunting today on polling booths throughout Queensland had pictures of Anna Bligh saying if you want to punish Anna Bligh, vote Liberal. The full-page advertisement in yesterday's Daily Telegraph in Sydney, if you want to punish Christina Keneally, vote Liberal. That will be a major factor if we do end up losing substantial numbers of seats in Queensland and New South Wales. The Liberal Party have been very successful at that. Their key message in the last week has been don't reward Labor, trying to bring up these state issues, and that certainly will damage our chances during this election. But in terms of this government's achievements, I couldn't agree any more with Andrew. I mean, there are 260,000 working people that have their jobs today solely because of Labor's sound management of the economy during the GFC. That is the record, to be blunt. That is enough for me to convince me that this government needs re-election. Work choices, the fact that Julia Gillard was able to repeal work choices with a hostile Senate.
Electronic advertisements cut out at midnight on Wednesday, Paul. Mitch, let me...
I was going to be nice to you this panel, Peter, and that's gone now.
Mitch, no, I'm sure you won't deliver an electronic advertisement on the other side.
Certainly not.
But Tony Abbott, I mean, you'd have to admit, he's managed, because of perhaps problems in the Labor Party, he's managed to escape the kind of scrutiny opposition leaders normally come in for in an election campaign.
Not for one moment. I think Tony has been under scrutiny from his budgie smugglers, through to his ears, his hairstyle, and every policy he's put out there.
With the debate, for example.
Oh, well, Tony was happy to debate Julia Gillard, who was turned up to the ABC. Julia didn't turn up. Julia jumped on a plane to Perth with no press pack in tow. She wanted to be anywhere but where Tony was. But we've been talking about the economy right through this campaign. I can understand why Andrew is very defensive of Labor's economic plan. Andrew is one of the architects of roofing insulation scheme. He was one of the architects of the school hall program.
It's going to be a long night. It's going to be a long night.
Great economic policy. But debt. Waste. Andrew said that we weren't talking about a vision, we weren't talking about an economic plan. Well, repaying debt is part of an economic plan. Stopping waste is part of an economic plan.
All right, enough partisanship. Scott Ryan, let me ask you. Negative campaigning, you're involved in strategy for the Liberal Party for some years. Negative campaigning is a feature of both sides. Both sides use it. Party strategists tell me, not necessarily you, they tell me that it is one of those things that works, where the voters don't like it, but it resonates. Are we likely to ever see that change? And there is a lot of negative advertising in this campaign from both sides.
Well, pointing out the record of your opponent, I don't see as negative advertising. The Liberal Party had, and the Coalition had ads pointing out exactly what the Coalition would do if we are elected. Now, Paul Howes earlier talked about alleged that the Liberal Party was trying to confect state and federal issues. It's not. It's what is happening in Canberra resembles what has happened at the state level, whether it's the greatest health reform since Medicare, that is simply employing an extra few hundred bureaucrats, or that resembles the nth time they've promised the Parramatta to Epping rail link, or the 7th time John Brumby's announced the transport plan. What is driving the degree of annoyance with the Labor Party is the fact that everything they've seen happen to their states, the failure to invest in infrastructure, the massive increases in the public sector, that is now coming to Canberra. And the Labor Party's rhetoric, is actually what's driving the problem here, because you talk about the greatest reform since Medicare, you escalate every problem as if it is an excuse for failure.
That is a good point, Andrew. I mean, I think one of Kevin Rudd's problems and one of the Labor Party's problems was that expectations were so high. And when expectations are as high as they were, when you fail to meet them, even if you've done okay, or well even, if you don't meet them, voters recognise that the opposition can attack it. Now, I know these guys will say you did worse than that, but for a lot of voters, that may be a reality in their mind that leaves them nonetheless deciding that it's been a bad government, when in fact it has simply been a government that's fallen short of hefty or height-wise expectations.
I think when you talk about waste, what the Labor government has done is avoided the enormous waste we've seen right around the world through the global financial crisis, where millions of people's jobs were lost and lots of waste occurred.
All right, we'll talk more about this. You're watching Sky News. We'll be continuing here in the tally room on Channel 602, but now we're going to throw back to the main news channel and to David Spears, for the main coverage. This is election 2010.
Live around the nation, broadcasting around the world, and live globally on the net at skynews.com.au. This is Election 2010 on Sky News.
Good evening and welcome to Election Night 2010 here on Sky News. Tonight we are bringing you unprecedented coverage of an Australian election and broadcasting around the world. We welcome viewers watching in Europe, in the UK, in Ireland on Sky News, in Canada, across Canada on CPAC. We have viewers joining us tonight in Washington, also across the Pacific, in Fiji, across Asia on Channel News Asia, welcome to you, and in China as well on CCTV. Wherever you are in the world, we have 7 satellites beaming this broadcast across the globe. Welcome to our coverage. And if you're not familiar with Australian democracy, it can be a robust process. So we hope you enjoy some vigorous debate tonight as we see who is going to form government and lead Australia for the next 3 years. It has been a very tight contest over the last 5 weeks, and the result tonight looks like being a nail-biter. The polls are suggesting Labor is a nose in front, but it's what happens in those marginal seats that will count. Whichever way it goes, there is much at stake, but particularly for the Labor Party. A loss tonight will see recriminations run deep. Will it be because of a poorly planned campaign? Will it be because of the decision to axe Kevin Rudd? Or does it go back further to the decision to shelve the emissions trading scheme? For the coalition, well, not as much at stake, because even if Tony Abbott doesn't quite get there, a narrow loss will still see him go down as a Conservative hero after a one-term government to put the coalition in a position where he nearly wins, or indeed does win, will be an unlikely victory indeed. To talk us through the night, to look at how these seats are going to fall, what's going to happen and why, now we welcome the former Prime Minister Bob Hawke and the former Liberal leader John Hewson to our panel. Thank you for joining us tonight. And of course we still have with us Eric Abetz, Fiona Nash, Christina Keneally and Tony Burke. Now, the exit polls, we've seen our own Sky News exit poll in 30 marginal seats show that Labor in front 51 to 49% in those marginal seats. There's a Channel 9 exit poll. This is a Galaxy poll. It shows Labor ahead 52 to 48%. John Hewson, we've heard the predictions from the others tonight. Some of them sitting on the fence, most of them sitting on the fence. What do you think is going to happen?
I think the fence is a safe place to be, despite the exit polls. But look, when Julia took over from Kevin, I thought that was, you know, I hadn't given Tony a chance until then, and I thought from then on it was a contest. At the start of the campaign, I was calling sort of hung parliament as a realistic possibility. It's somewhere between a 3 or 4 seat win to Labor and a hung parliament, in my view. But you know, who knows how those individual seats are going to cut tonight with such a mixture this time of local and state issues as well as the federal issues, a number of new candidates. I mean, a lot of factors that make those individual contests very important.
Bob Hawke, 3 years ago on this election night, you called it first out of anyone. I think it was before 8 o'clock that you called it. Do you think you'll be doing that tonight? And which way do you think it's going to go?
Well, I hope so, and I hope we'll be calling a Labor victory. But I'm realistic. I take comfort from the exit polls. I'd rather they were the way they are, both of them showing slight Labor lead, rather that way than not. But it is a case where you could have, it's a banality to say it, but it's the fact. You could have a narrow Labor victory, narrow coalition victory, a hung parliament. They are the realities. Unfortunately, we've still got a while before we can identify the booths from which the first results are coming in, because we've always got to remember on election night, you've got to know your booths. Because there's a great variation within electorates in the booths.
Fortunately, we have with us tonight people who know the booths very well. Now, you fought and won many elections. Do you recall an election being this close?
No, not when I was involved. We didn't make people suffer like this. But
84 was it?
You've got to go back to 1961 when you know, the famous GILLON victory in Moreton.
Yeah.
Of course we we chided Bob Menzies that was the communist preference that got him up. I think that we're stretching a pretty long bow there, but nevertheless, it's a good yarn.
It's a good argument.
A good yarn.
You could have a Labor hero made tonight in a seat like that, couldn't you?
Yeah,
you could
yeah,
have one candidate who just gets over the line. John Hewson, I mean, historically, close elections have tended to go the incumbent's way, but for someone who's also been through an election, wasn't as successful as Bob Hawke, of course, but what would be the emotions tonight, do you think, of Tony Abbott, who used to work for you, and for Julia Gillard as well?
I think they'd be both pretty tense. I mean, I think they both probably went into this morning wondering whether they really had a chance or not. And I think realistically, as they went around their booths or they went around marginal seats, however they spent the day, they would have got a bit of a feel on the ground. But, you know, I can remember on election night I had a very clear idea that I wasn't going to win. I think I was the only one who didn't think I was going to win at the time, but I didn't think I would win. And
Is that right? You had strategists telling you we're going to get there?
No, I just said to my group at the time, look, I reckon I've doubled the margin in my seat, and we've just narrowly lost, and that was pretty. You had a feel for it, and I think Tony and Julia will have their own feel for it. I think the last 3 days of the campaign were pretty tense in the sense that Tony sort of made a bit of a recovery, Julia showed a bit of pressure. So I think they probably both went into this morning feeling quite uncertain about, you know, where's this going to go in the course of the day.
It's been a very interesting campaign, not a dull one at all, I don't think. I want to ask each of you who you think won the campaign, not necessarily who's going to win tonight. Tony Burke, do you think Julia Gillard lost the campaign?
We effectively ran a 3-week campaign at the end because the second week was extraordinarily difficult for us. So right at the beginning, I remember standing beside Julia Gillard in Queensland, and we're up in Townsville, and she made the comment, "This is going to be a photo finish," and the press gallery laughed, as if this is going to be a tight election. In the week that followed, we had an extraordinarily difficult week.
The leaks, 3 damaging leaks.
We went backwards in the poll published in Fairfax. We went backwards 6 points that week, and then in the final 3 weeks of the campaign, every day we've been closing that gap and getting closer. Whether we've got ourselves back in front or not is something that I guess we'll find out soon.
We'll find out tonight. Looking at that 5-week period, though, Christina Keneally, given things were so bad in week 2, can Labor really say that they've won the campaign?
I think they can clearly say that from when we got the real Julia, they have, because the real Julia is the person who's pulled this campaign up literally by her teeth. She has been out there working so hard. Her media performances have been flawless in my view, and it's been her personality, her talent and her sheer force of will that has turned the campaign around. What Tony said is inarguable. The first period of this campaign was a shocker, and it came down to the disunity and the leaks. Fortunately, the party saw what they were doing to themselves, and that stopped. And I think Julia's run since that point a magnificent campaign. Whether it's enough, and I know that, you know, I agree with the former Prime Minister. We'd rather see the exit polls where they are. There is a sense of optimism, but whether it's enough will ultimately come down to what happens in those individual seats tonight.
I know that both of you had big caveats on whether Labor had won the campaign because of what happened in those first couple of weeks. Erica Betts, looking at the 5-week period, though, who won the campaign?
I think Tony Abbott was a clear winner. If I might quickly rejoin in relation to the real Julia, just remember, when she was the real Julia, she was the one that pretended to speak from the heart, and we found out that she actually had speech notes on the lectern. So the fake Julia was there throughout the campaign, and I think that damaged Labor towards the end because they were hoping for a strong finish, and Julia had allegedly spoken from the heart to all the Labor Party faithful, and a very savvy cameraman was able to photograph the notes on the lectern, which completely exposed the real Julia argument.
Can I say, if you watch that speech, she was not looking at those notes. Of course she wasn't. She was speaking from the heart. Anyone who sat in that room was gobsmacked by the delivery by the intensity, by the intelligence.
What were the notes doing there, Christina? What were the notes
and you
doing
never,
there,
You've
please?
got notes right in front of you right now, Senator.
But I don't claim to be speaking off the cuff and from the heart, which was a complete deception.
What are you It was not.
Notes. And that's fine.
All right.
Not the heart.
Just quickly, before we get to our reporters, Fiona Nash, was it a clear win in the campaign one way or the other?
I think Tony definitely won the campaign, and that real, while we're laughing about it, I think that real Julia moment was something that did put people off. And I think if we'd known we could have 2 leaders, we would have thrown in another one as well. But Tony did a very good job, and I think, Tony was definitely genuine, and I think the expectations on Julia Gillard were quite high, and I don't think she really met them, and I don't think the expectations on Tony really were all that high, and I think he actually exceeded them.
Yeah.
So
John Hewson, do you agree with that?
Well, you've had the bias on both sides. I'll give you an objective comment. I think actually Tony won only marginally. And the reason I think he won is that he outperformed expectations. I think there's a very strong expectation that he would fall in a hole, that he'd do another Bernie Banton or he'd do another work choices fumble or whatever. And he didn't. He stayed disciplined, he stayed focused. And you did see the real Tony pretty much, because that's how he is. I had annoyingly 3 years with him. I know what he's like. I saw him. I saw him for 5 weeks.
Did Labor underestimate Tony Abbott, Bob?
Yes, I think we did. My first point about the campaign is that I certainly, and I think everyone else, underestimated Tony's capacity to go through that campaign. He did better than I expected and better than everyone else expected, and I give him credit for it. Having said that, I just must get rid of this absurdity with respect, Eric, about the reading from notes. I was there. I was there. As certainly, notes. She did look at them. This was one of the great deliveries you've ever heard. She spoke for half an hour without using the notes. It was a marvellous performance.
The point is, though, the advisors came around to the journalists before the speech and said she's doing this off the cuff, and then she had notes on the speech.
But so what a piddling point.
Hardly a big issue.
She could have had 6 spiders on it. Would that have been relevant?
But she shouldn't have made the assertion, and the Labor Party spin doctors went out there spinning something which was patently false.
Well, fortunately, we can rely on the good judgment and the actual vision, the capacity to see of Australian electors. They watched and they could see she did not read from the notes. For God's sake. Now, as to the question, who won the campaign, I would say I'd put it a draw, I think. If anything, I'd lead slightly to Julie, but I don't want to be unfair, because I think the point that's been made by most of you, I think, is right, that it is the case that Tony did exceed expectations, and he's got to be given credit for that. Julie, of course, had enormous difficulties, having been in the situation where she was part of the disposal of Kevin. That was a problem for her. But then, as the thing got underway and the leaks got out of the way, I think she led very well. So I'd draw her slightly to Julie.
We'll come back to the Kevin Rudd question in a moment. Let's go to our reporters, though. With the 2 leaders tonight, ASHLEIGH Gillon is in Melbourne at the Convention Centre there. ASHLEIGH, what's happening?
Oh, well, David, the red, white and blue balloons have been strung around the convention centre here. This is where the Labor Party faithful will watch the results come in tonight. Of course, at the moment, it's really just journalists and some Labor staffers. Those staffers, of course, I've been watching very closely over the past few weeks, travelling around on buses and planes as Julia Gillard has been hitting those key marginal seats around the country. I have to say, over the past couple of days, their nerves have been on display. Tonight, they're feeling slightly buoyed by those exit poll results, but no one here is confident about the result, that's for sure. Julia Gillard herself won't be here until well into the night. She'll be watching the results unfold tonight with her family, who have flown in from Adelaide, and of course her partner Tim. Later tonight, when she does get here, well, it could be a victory or defeat speech, or even a likely possibility, of course, is that we won't know tonight, and she might have to front her supporters here without any result, and just tell them to cross their fingers for as the results come in over the next few days.
ASHLEIGH, thank you. Kieran Gilbert is with Tony Abbott tonight. Okay, Kieran Gilbert is with Tony Abbott tonight in Sydney. Kieran, the exit polls we've been talking about, and you were here with us earlier as we looked at the Sky News exit poll. How do you think that's going to go down with Tony Abbott and his camp tonight?
Well, look, I spoke to Brian Loughnane, the Liberal Party director, only a few moments ago, and he's still pretty optimistic. He says there is a swing on. The question is just how big that swing is, and I think that's the question mark over this whole election day and evening. We're poring over the numbers in the exit polls, and it shows Labor's primary vote is up from the published polls of recent days. And as Ashley said, the Labor staffers are buoyed by that, but certainly not disenchanted at all at this point. They want to await the real numbers as opposed to the real Julia. They're awaiting the real numbers. They know that there are some swings happening, Dave, but as Brian Loughnane said to me, the question is just how big the swings are, and really, as we discussed earlier, the exit polls need to be seen with a sense of caution, even more so, I think, this election than in elections gone by, and the reason being that state by state it's hard to say with any surety that there is a swing, a uniform swing in place. In different seats, there are different issues at play. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we await the formal numbers through the AEC.
All right, Kieran Gilbert, thank you. We're going to go to our reporter Laura Jays, who's in one of the marginal seats we'll be looking at closely tonight. It's in Queensland, in around Mackay there, the seat of Dawson. Laura Jays joins us from there now. Laura, what's the feeling there on the ground tonight?
Well, David, just a few months ago, Tony Abbott said that if the coalition can't win Dawson, well, they can't win government. As you know, this is one of 16 marginal seats here in Queensland. It's important to both parties. And look, at the last election, this was one of the more stunning gains for Labor. A little-known candidate, James Bidgood, managed to unseat a long-standing National. There was a 13% swing in this seat, and the ALP will be hoping they can retain some of that momentum in 2010. Julia Gillard, David, has been up here twice since campaigning began. Her deputy, Wayne Swan, 4 times as recently as yesterday. So they want to hold on to this by the skin of their teeth. The issues for the people in Dawson, they're local issues. For sporting fields, they want better roads, but on a more national level, it's a national broadband plan, and of course, that proposed mining tax is weighing on voters' minds. But Mike Bronca for the ALP has a fight ahead of him here. His opponent is George Christensen, and if you believe at least the betting agencies, well, they're putting their money on George Christensen for the LNP.
All right, Laura Jays, thank you, and we'll come back to you later in the night as well. Looking at the issues, I mean, the mining tax was one of the big reasons why Kevin Rudd lost support. He was not seen to be able to fix this problem of his stoush with the mining industry, the votes that it was going to cost Labor, particularly in the key resources states, Queensland, where we're just looking there, and also Western Australia as well. But now with the benefit of hindsight, this decision to get rid of Kevin Rudd has cast a pall for Labor over this campaign. It's made it very difficult to fight on the traditional strengths of incumbency. Tony Burke, any regrets at all about the decision to do away with Kevin Rudd tonight?
I'm very glad we've gone to this election with Julia Gillard. And I'm very glad that Kevin Rudd has been campaigning for Julia Gillard to win as well. You need to remember how bad things had become in Western Australia. The seats that we're talking about tonight, and we're saying, oh, it might be a win, might be a gain, beyond Fremantle, it was going to be hard for us to get anywhere. And when Julia Gillard...
Gary Gray might have lost his seat.
It was very difficult. And when Julia Gillard announced she was going to move from consultation to negotiation, that was the shift that was required, and we are having a very different conversation tonight about our chances in Western Australia because of that shift.
Bob Hawke, do you agree that Labor's going to do better with Julia Gillard than it would have with Kevin Rudd?
Yes, we've got to remember the facts. This wasn't a capricious decision by the Labor caucus. The polling had shown a successive decline in Labor's fortune and in the popularity of Kevin. I take no pleasure in that. None at all, but these were hard, unarguable facts. And there's a couple of other points that need to be made, I think. We're used to hypocrisy in politics, but isn't it funny, the coalition talking about blood on the floor? I mean, their party room floor has been awash with blood. And they had started off with Brendan. Sort of, from the moment Brendan was in, they were working their collective butts off to knock him off. So the Earl of Wentworth gets up, Malcolm Turnbull. And of course, Tony and his mob are after him from the word go. The knives are out. I mean, there was more blood on the Liberal Party room floor than there was on ours.
It can be argued, though, that in opposition, it's a different thing. It's a different thing in opposition to doing it in government.
It's a question of who you think is going to do the best job of winning your government. I mean, the other point I was going to make, it occurred to me when I was up there at the launch. I got up to give the speech and I looked down and there was Bill Hayden sitting in the second row. And I felt like saying, but I thought it might be a little bit uncomfortable. I said, well, look, there was a Victorian with a reasonably prominent nose who 3 weeks before the election knocked this Queenslander off. This Queenslander accepted the result and became part of one of the great governments of all time. Now, another Victorian with a reasonably prominent nose came along, gave much more notice, and I hope what will happen is what happened in '83, that the Queenslander who was knocked off will become part of a great Julia Gillard government.
Well, she's certainly made it clear throughout that he'll get a senior cabinet role. Erica Betts, is there hypocrisy here? Not so much in the fact that the Liberals churned through 3 leaders in the last 3 years, but you guys were also calling for Kevin Rudd to go.
Well, of course we were. Any opposition wants the Prime Minister to go, and that was a fantastic scalp that Tony Abbott is able to lay claim to. But really, for Julia Gillard for the future, if opinion polls turn bad for a short time, like they did for Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard will always need to be looking over her shoulder. Because for 11.5 years, we had John Howard sometimes with similar polls, but we bounced back.
Wins tonight after a very difficult campaign, she'll be under some sort of leadership threat. Really?
Because the Labor, and it wasn't the Labor Party caucus, let's not forget who orchestrated this. The union officials met in Sydney. They finished at 3. No, they finished at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 4 o'clock, the faction leaders were set to work. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Kevin Rudd was gone. This was not an uprising in the caucus. This was an uprising in the trade union movement.
The caucus really wanted to stick with Kevin Rudd. Do you think that the caucus was so fond of Kevin Rudd they wanted to stick with him and were told by union masters to
the caucus were told by people like Senator Arbib, Senator Feeney and Senator Farrell that their endorsements would be at stake if they didn't make the decision, and they were frog-marched into that room, and as a result, Kevin Rudd knew that his number was up, and that is why he didn't recontest.
The point that's been made throughout the campaign, Christine Kennelly, is that this execution of Kevin Rudd has reminded people, particularly of New South Wales Labor, and the way that you've churned through leaders from Bob Carr to Maurice Yemmer to Nathan Rees, and finally to you. Is there something in that?
The first thing I would say is no caucus takes the decision to change leaders lightly or as frivolously as Senator Betts has just outlined, that in fact these are very serious decisions, and perhaps I more than anyone can speak to how seriously a caucus takes that decision. Now, the other thing that people are fond of saying, it's the same hands that got rid of Julia, or that got rid of Kevin and put in Julia, that somehow got rid of Nathan and put in me. Utter rubbish. Utter rubbish. In fact, quite the opposite. What
Senator
the caucus
had no role. Please.
In my becoming leader of the New South Wales Labor Party, absolutely not. And in fact, what the caucus did was take very seriously the need to recognise the things that these two gentlemen have outlined, and Bob's right, it gives you no pleasure to do that. Can I say, though, when you look at how Kevin approached that mining tax debate, and perhaps how he approached some of the other debates, he did like to approach things in a series of debate and fight and argument, to define himself by the fights that he had. I think unfortunately for him, it too often became about the fight, whether it was with state governments, about hospital systems, whether it was about mining companies, about the mining tax. And what happened when Julia took over is we saw a real shift. Certainly we as state governments saw that shift. And certainly the mining companies saw that shift, and I think the community has seen that shift.
Because one of the defining images of Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister was that photograph, or those images with you, where he wouldn't look you in the eye. I mean, looking back on that now, tell us what was really going on. What was that all about?
Well, can I first say that at the time, I don't think either Kevin or I would have appreciated how that was appearing on the television screens. We had a very productive meeting that followed that. That is absolutely the case. And when I came out of that hour-long meeting to my staff saying what in God's name happened in there, it was a bit, it was surprising. Although at the time, I did think that perhaps he might have come into that room in a slightly different demeanour, because this was an opportunity for him to build a coalition of premiers to support the health reform. Instead, he sought to make it a fight with state premiers to achieve health reform. Consequently, that debate became about the fight, not about the reform we were trying to achieve. We got to reform at the end, largely because the Labor premiers drug everyone at COAG to it, but it could have been achieved in a very different way. If you look at how Julia approached the My School debate, she had fierce opposition from the unions, from the teachers' union. She had fierce opposition from the opposition. And yet she stared it down, and in a series of patient negotiation, discussion and persistence, she got there in the end.
But back on this issue of Labor churning through leaders, it does seem when we contrast today's, particularly New South Wales Labor movement, with the Labor movement of your era, Bob Hawke, there isn't the respect for leadership, the belief that you need to keep a leader in place for a fairly long period of time to build credibility and trust. Is that a fair point?
I think as a leader, you have to every day earn that respect from your caucus. Every day you have to earn that respect from the people of the jurisdiction that you govern. And that's fundamental to leadership. And you look at the case of Morris Yema, there was a very unique and particular situation there, a very unique debate within the party. I do not seek to rewrite that debate tonight. In fact, I in fact apologise for it, because it was a debate that saw us lose a very good premier and go through a period of very difficult period for us in New South Wales. Okay. But the decision taken by a caucus to change leaders is not one they take lightly or easily. And certainly I know my federal colleagues did not do that lightly, but they did it in the best interests of the Labor movement and the Labor Party, and certainly in the best interests of the nation. All right, some very interesting reflections there. Speaking of Kevin Rudd, we have a reporter with him tonight in his seat of Griffith in Brisbane, David Lipson. Now, Kevin Rudd, you've followed him throughout this campaign at times where he has not wanted to engage in questions from reporters such as yourself about his execution, about some of the issues and policies that Julia Gillard has changed since she took over. But he did also, spend some time in hospital as well, we should remember, having his gallbladder removed, only to emerge looking fairly prime ministerial for a brief address to the cameras to say that he wanted to stop Tony Abbott sliding into office. Now, how do you think he might be feeling tonight, and what his hopes do you think would be?
Well, look, I imagine that he would be hoping for a Labor victory, but it's very hard to know exactly what's going through his mind. Clearly, there would be so much disappointment and a little bit, you would imagine, of resentment. But look, this is all speculation. I'm only really going off the way that he looked, for example, in that staged meeting that he held with Julia Gillard here in Brisbane a few weeks ago. It's going to be interesting to try and gauge his reaction tonight. We understand he will be speaking on stage to the troops here that have been manning the polling booths today, but how long he stays here is another question entirely. The room here, I mean, this is Kevin Rudd's election party, but it's a pretty small room, as you can probably see behind me. Some of the Kevin Rudd posters are now up behind me too, but really there's only seating here for about 30 people. I understand about 150 people will be arriving later on in the night, but this is a very different room to the room of 2007 when there was so much elation surrounding the Rudd slide.
All right, David Lipson, well, we'll check in with you later in the evening, and no doubt once we know what's happening in Griffith, we might see Kevin Rudd and we'll see whether he takes any questions. Thank you. Lee Hatcher is with another former leader tonight, Malcolm Turnbull, in the seat of Wentworth. Now, Lee, Malcolm Turnbull's not in any danger. He was last election facing a fairly tight contest there against George Newhouse for Labor, but this time around Labor, it doesn't seem, has devoted much in the way of resources to that seat.
No, notwithstanding the fact that the Greens' preferences will be flowing to the ALP, which is quite ironic with Malcolm Turnbull's stand on climate change, David, but that's another story. Yes, Malcolm Turnbull holds this seat with about 3.9% margin, and it's very safely predicted that he'll hold on to that and probably increase the margin. We're at the Eastern Suburbs Rugby Union Club tonight, which is Turnbull HQ for campaign 2010. I have good news for you, David. The guests now outnumber the media. Guests have now numbered about 15 compared to about 7 of us in the media. There's a number cruncher about 10 metres over there with about 4 laptops in front of him, ready to get the very latest. No numbers have come in as yet. He's waiting for some of the bigger birds that probably won't lob until about 8:30 tonight, birds like Bondi, and they'll be the key kind of determiners about where the vote in Wentworth has fallen. We're expecting Malcolm Turnbull, after some media commitments tonight, he'll be here about 8 o'clock tonight, and we should have a result. He's expecting to have a result at least by 9 o'clock and make his, what he hopes is his victory speech to his adoring supporters. There are several hundred wine glasses over there, so the crowd's going to get a lot bigger, especially seeing it's free beer and wine tonight for them.
All right, Lee Hatcher, thank you very much for that. We'll check in with you a bit later as well. Now, it's about half an hour since the polls closed in the eastern states, and the point worth making too that tonight, given it's a winter election, we have Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania all on the same time zone. All those polls have closed, and that means 122 of the 150 seats in play across Australia will see some results early-ish tonight. Whether that means we'll see a result early tonight, I would doubt. But we should have some results coming through shortly, and we'll get to those in a minute. But let's have a look at the Sky News 30. These are 30 seats that we've identified we'll keep an eye on tonight. Not an entire list of the marginals that we'll be watching tonight, but these are mostly Labor seats that we'll be looking at tonight, and then some Liberals that are some chance of going to the Labor Party. We also have with us Bruce Hawker and Graham Morris keeping an eye on the seats with us as well. Bruce Hawker, are you seeing anything, any early results so far?
Graham's got some numbers for Eden Monaro, and then I thought we might just look at the seats that need, how many seats are actually in play for the viewers.
Yeah, I think the Labor Party would like to stop the election now, in that Eden Monaro, which is essentially one of the cut-off points, you know, if seats fall, Eden Monaro is sort of the last one to fall as there's a change of government. At the moment, on the very, very first booth that came in, the Labor Party's up 3% and the Liberals are down 4% and the Greens are up 2%. So I think the Labor Party would really like to stop now.
With a few hundred votes counted. All
Tiny little booth. But just on that, on this point, David, Labor holds 83 seats in the Parliament out of 150, but notionally they have 88. And tonight what we'll be looking at is the 88 number and seeing how the seats whittle away or grow, as the case may be, from that 88 number. So that means that there are certain seats which are held by the Liberals, like Gilmore, for example, or Herbert, which we will be counting as Labor seats notionally. So if the Libs win Herbert, then that's a seat for them. Otherwise, it's counted as part of the 88 seats that the Labor Party hold.
I do think, David, it is one of the things worth considering tonight, and that was Tony Abbott has to fight 80 years of history, because no first government has been knocked off after in the last 80 years. He's also up against the first female Prime Minister in the country.
Where's Gemma?
But he's also up against, I think, a disgraceful redistribution where instead of having to win 12 seats as he had to, he now has to win 17. That was, when you looked at the boundaries, I thought it was a bit unfair.
Mind you, the seats where they are notionally Labor, they are very, very marginally Labor in the main. Seats like Herbert is right on the cusp, 0.03%. It's very much a line ball proposition.
All right, we'll keep an eye then on that, but let's go to Eden Monaro, where we've got just a few hundred votes coming. Gemma Vaness is there for us tonight in Queanbeyan. Gemma, this, as we know, is the bellwether seat that normally goes the way of the government, or has since 1972, so there will be a great deal of focus on this. Some very early results which we can't read too much into, but what's the feeling there on the ground?
Well, the feeling is, put it this way, David, we are at the function for the sitting member, Mike Kelly. It is believed that he will retain this seat, although the results have been chipped away at by the Liberal Party. As we saw when the election campaign began here in Eden Monaro, Mike Kelly with 61 to 39% two-party preferred. That's been chipped away to 52 to 48, and both he and his opponent, the Liberals' David Gazard, both with a 40% primary vote. But as I said, we are here at Mike Kelly's function, but obviously we could be moving to David Gazard's. We'll have to see how the counting goes.
All right, Gemma Vaness, thank you for that. One seat that we, of course, will keep an eye on tonight. It may not determine necessarily who forms government, but the seat of Melbourne, where Labor is facing a real challenge from the Greens. What do you think the chances are here of the Greens picking up this seat tonight?
I campaigned in it briefly, David, and I have to say that our people were very realistic about it. They thought there was genuinely a chance of losing it. They were optimistic. If they'd had to, I said, well, look, again, over the last coffee, I said, well, the real question is the money question. If you had to bet, where would you put your money? And they said, we put it on us, but they were realistic about the very significant threat from the Greens.
Is the Greens' vote pushed higher in this election because of what Labor's done on the emissions trading scheme and border protection?
No, I think there's a number of reasons. That may be one of the factors, and I just haven't done an analysis or a group focus discussion to know. But
your gut feeling
but obviously one of the factors is that Lindsay Tanner is not standing. Now, Lindsay had been pushed very hard. He only had about a 5% margin in 2007, so the push was on. But the fact that he's gone, he was a well-respected man, that would be another factor that Kath Botel has to deal with. Oh, well, you know, the other issue of the Kevin issue, that may be a factor there, I don't know. Plus, obviously, right round Australia, the Greens are doing far better than they've ever done before, and that reflects a number of things, perhaps in part the issue you talked about, but also I think it's probably true to say that you probably say the same thing. I mean, it's not a partisan point I'm making here. I think there's probably now a little less respect for the major parties generally than there was before.
We'll get your thoughts on that. Let's just hear from a reporter, Bridie Barry, who's in Melbourne, in the seat there on the ground. Bridie, what mail are you picking up on the ground there about the way this is going to go?
Yeah, well, we're here at the Greens party, well, hopefully for what the supporters are saying would be the celebration headquarters tonight here at the Victoria Hotel in the centre of Melbourne. They're expecting around 400 Greens supporters here who are hoping to be celebrating an historic win for the Greens here in the seat of Melbourne. Adam Brandt has been running on the campaign slogan of Make History Melbourne. Indeed, he would make history if he is elected. The seat's been held by Labor since 1904, and he would also be the first Green to be elected to the House of Representatives since, well, the first ever in a general election. There has been a Green in the lower house before, back in 2002, but that was in a by-election then. Now, he's up against the ALP candidate, Kath Botel. She, of course, 46-year-old mother of two, former ACTU official and also a lead negotiator of the Fair Work Act. She, of course, becoming candidate after the retirement of Lindsay Tanner, who wanted to spend more time with his family. Now, he was a very popular local member here, so certainly that, from what we're hearing, is expected to be some bit of a factor in this result today. Also, as we've been hearing, the Greens have been increasing their support. Adam Brandt came second here with 45% of the vote after preferences at the 2007 election. Mix of views I was hearing at the polling booths today. I went to a major one at Richmond there. Some disaffected Labor voters have voted Green, they said, in protest at the treatment of Kevin Rudd, and also because of the sameness, they thought, of the major parties, that they couldn't really see a difference, certainly in issues that were important to them, climate change and the treatment of refugees. And also there, of course, on the other side, I met a first-time voter who was thinking of voting for the Greens, but in the end voted for Labor because she was really worried that a vote for the Greens would end up seeing Tony Abbott in power, would help him get into power. Certainly the bookies have got their money on Adam Brandt. I think he's got $1.40 on him to win, while Cat Botel's got $2.80. We are expecting we'll start hearing some results from about 7:30 here, even being told possibly a result by about 9 o'clock. Adam Brandt expected here by about 7:30, so we'll certainly be hoping to speak to him. He needs a swing of 4.7% to win.
Righty, Barry, thank you. We'll come back to you later on. Graham Morris, you've got some figures there on a particular...
Well, I think we heard Eric Abetz earlier in the night saying that Tasmania did not look as if it was going to move much. Well, the first couple of booths in from Franklin and Braddon...
Let's have a look at Franklin then, if we can, and see what results we're getting. But what booth results are you hearing, Graham?
Well, it's about 16%. It's very, very early, but there's a move to the government of about 16% in one of them, and it's about 6% in the other one. So it just shows you early in the piece in Tasmania, if people were hoping that there would be a big swing to the government, not yet.
All right. Well, we'll come back and have a look at Tasmania once we do get more results out of there. But John Hewson, back on this Greens support, which has been strong right through the campaign. Do you agree with Bob Hawke's comment that it's disaffection with the major parties? Is this something that's built over the years? Has the time come for the Greens, essentially?
Well, I think it's essentially disaffection with the major parties, a protest vote, if you like. I mean, the Greens last time polled about 8%, and now in the recent polling they've been doing 12 to 14%. You know, it's a big movement. I mean, there is an element in there, I'm sure, of climate change and a belief that they stand for a clearer-cut position on climate change. But you know, it's sort of a bit bizarre in the sense that they had a chance to back the ETS and didn't. And so I think that's sort of a bit of a hollow vote in that sense, because their track record in voting on environmental issues isn't that strong. But that's why I think essentially it's a protest vote. And I think when you look at the seat of Melbourne, to me, I mean, it's a big margin, as Bob said. I think it's about 4.7%. You take the Tanner factor out of that, so OK, that moves it back a lot closer. But it is a seat that I think if the Greens are going to win anything, they're going to win that that'll be their sort of defining moment in this campaign if they can win Melbourne.
Sure will.
David, can I make the quick point that the exit poll would suggest that the Green vote is 9%, which would suggest that on election day it has come back a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, it has come back a lot.
A lot of people said that would happen.
Yes, and
still, that's a little bit better than they got at the last election.
Look, a 1 or 2% increase, no doubt. And I must say, in relation to Melbourne, I must say I wouldn't normally go against the bookies, and if that's what they're saying, chances are that's what will happen. But I would have thought it'd still be a Labor win, but we'll wait and see.
Let's take a look at the seat of Flynn, if we can. Now, this one's in Queensland, as you can see there. A seat, I think we've got some results coming up here now that we can... OK, I can't see those results, I'm afraid, but... Graham Morris.
For what it's worth.
Yes, Bennelong. Just have a look at Bennelong.
OK,
the first booth.
Bennelong. Let's have a look at that.
First booth in Bennelong has come in. There is a swing to the Liberal Party of 4%. There's a swing to the Greens, but there's a 13% swing in that booth against the Labor Party and against Maxine.
All right, let's go back to have a look at our primary vote, if we can, on Bennelong, just to follow that up. Graham's saying he's hearing a swing to the Liberals and the Greens. Our primary vote shows, at the moment, with only, well, less than half of 1% counted. That's pretty hard to call off. But Graham, what you're hearing, that in the booths that you're getting mail from, there is a swing to the Liberals.
In the early booths, the Labor primary vote is way down.
David, this is one where we're not the vote to stop now.
Can I say Graham, what you're saying there, I think the trend across the country that we now know is that the Greens vote is higher than it's been. The Labor primary takes a hit on the way through. The increase in the Liberal vote at the moment is marginal, but there is some increase. I think And all of that is consistent with everything that we said at the beginning of this panel about an incredibly tight election.
All right. Let's then... can we go back to having a look at some of those Queensland seats? Because right about now we should be starting to see perhaps some very early results come through. We might start at the top and work our way down. So let's start with Leichhardt, if we can, and see if there's any early results coming through there now. About 45 minutes since the close of polls. What sort of results have we got there? This is the battle between Jim Turner and the former member Warren Ench for the Liberals. One that the coalition needs to pick up if they're going to win this election, you would think. All right, let's have a look at the primary vote there. OK, so almost 2% counted. This is going to be neck and neck. Let's have a look after preferences. It's very close, but a swing against Labor there of 6%. Erica Betts.
David, I've got news from our people on the ground there that they believe Leichhardt will be a definite pick-up tonight, albeit Flynn too close to call. But
well,
Leichhardt, we would like to chalk
Flynn,
that
but Leichhardt, you think
yeah,
is there?
Look, clearly too close to call at this stage, but those that are on the ground are telling me that we can live in hope in Leichhardt.
Have you heard anything on Leichhardt, Tony Burke?
No, only to say that Leichhardt is one of the most diverse seats in Australia. You've got your Torres Strait Islands, you've then got your area through the Cape, you've then got the Cairns community and a whole lot of sugar areas around Mossman. That it is getting a few birds is hard to read a trend. It's going to be a tough seat. It may well be one that the coalition picks up, but on the handful of birds that we've got in, I think it'd be a brave call.
All right, let's go further down the coast then to Herbert, if we can have a look at that. Let's bring up the figures there for Herbert around Townsville. And as you can see there, these are two new candidates after Peter Lindsay's retirement at this election. Less than 1% counted there. Yeah. And again, very close. You can see the Liberals, Ewan Jones, just in front on the primary vote, but a lot of these Greens votes, let's have a look after preferences, a lot of these Greens votes, yeah, I think this is far too early to say, but a 3% swing, less than 1% counted, that's going to be far too early to call. Let's go further down to the seat of Dawson, if we can, around Mackay, and have a look at how this one is looking just a bit further down the Queensland coast there. Mike Brunker is, well, going to struggle on that sort of figure, you would think. That's about 1% of the vote counted. So, again, very early days on that one, but have a look after preferences. You can see there that George Christensen is picking up a big swing with less than 1% counted.
This one as well.
George has run a really good campaign there. It's been a pretty colourful campaign up there, there's no doubt about that. But George is a very good local person, involved in local council, and he's been a very good on-the-ground campaigner.
But Fiona, not that good.
I mean, you'll even take it. No, he has been very, very good.
Fair
good
point.
66%
Yeah.
vote.
Let's have a look at our map, if we can, and come further down the coast. Now, the seats here that we really want to concentrate on before we get into Brisbane, I think Longman's going to be a fascinating seat to watch tonight. Let's have a look at see if there's any primary results there yet for Longman. This is, of course, the seat where the Liberals have the young Wyatt Roy. OK, no results.
Too close to call.
Too close to call. All right. And then maybe if we have a look at Dixon. Let's have a look at Dixon if we can. Let's see what the primary vote there is, where Peter Dutton, of course, is after a redistribution to Labor. OK, too early there as well. We'll come back once we get some more results, if we hear of any more in and around Brisbane. But this is going to be where the battleground is, and we're seeing some... why are we seeing early results come through, do you think, for those far-flung seats up on the north of Queensland?
Oh, chances are, because there are smaller booths, and therefore those results come in quicker.
Quicker to count.
And in fairness, smaller booths, usually outlying areas, tend to favour the Conservative side of politics, so you can't take too much store on them, although we in the Coalition, of course, live in hope with that great result in Dawson.
All right. Graham Morris, we have some news from Graham.
Yep, Patterson, which is sitting just on the Liberal side in New South Wales, 0.6% required to swing, and for Labor to win it. And at one stage during the campaign, they thought the Labor might have a go against Bob Baldwin and try and knock him off. Well, at the moment, early in the count, 8 and a bit % swing to Bob Baldwin, which is an extraordinary result for him. Conversely, to show you how patchy this night might be, Macquarie, which is the second most marginal seat on the other side of the fence, is a 2% swing to the Labor Party early.
All right, well, we're just still on Patterson here at the moment. OK, we're going to Macquarie now. There's the primary vote. This is only very few votes counted there.
But this is the Mount Wilson and the Cat Eye sort of booed. They're saying 2.66% swing to the Labor Party.
OK.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not quite getting that.
We've counted 0.27% of the vote.
The booths that Graham's talking about there, would they encourage you one way or the other?
The seats that we're getting in first are the most diverse seats. Yeah. So the ones that are coming in first are the ones with something of a, some sort of urban area, and then some very small outlying booths. Now, individual candidates will have picked different communities that they're running particular campaigns on.
Yeah.
It's a brave call to take too much from what we're going to get over the next 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, yeah, but these are going to be a couple of interesting seats around Sydney. The one Macquarie that we were talking about there, and Macarthur in here as well. Robertson and Dobell up on the central coast of New South Wales. Tony, I think it was you telling us earlier you think there might have been a bit of movement, or was it Bruce Hawker saying some movement back to Labor?
In the final week in Robertson. I mean, interestingly, for 3 of the 4 seats you've mentioned, there is no incumbent Member of Parliament for 3 of those 4. So in terms of swings to where we were at the last election, it's really tough.
Doesn't matter much.
And your final issues in the campaign that were run, the issues that Tony Abbott would have run against us, the issues that we ran the other way in terms of cuts, in terms of broadband, health and education issues and work choices, those final week messages will have been heard very loudly from each side.
Bruce Hawker, I think Bruce Hawker's just got some figures, perhaps, Bruce?
Just from our own scrutineer figures in Robertson, David, we've got the Liberals on 325 votes, Labor on 305, so incredibly close on a very small sample.
Yeah, we've got a few more votes here now, Bruce. This is the seat of Robertson, just under 2% counted, and this is looking very close indeed on the primary vote there. Let's have a look after preferences at which way that is likely to break. And, yeah, well,
1.6%.
It's only 1.6% counted, but perhaps it does back up, Tony Burke, what you've been saying. Christina Keneally.
Deborah O'Neill is an excellent candidate. She nearly knocked off a Liberal member when she ran at the state election in one of our closest elections. She's a terrific candidate with a great local profile, and it's not surprising in this last week we've seen some momentum come her way. But I agree with Tony. I don't think you'd be brave to call it right now.
David, one of the things I think we'll have to wait for are the pre-poll votes. We've had the largest number ever, and if there was, as Tony Burke says, and I don't want to dispute that, a surge to Labor in the last few days in Robertson, the pre-polls may not necessarily reflect that surge, and therefore I think a lot of these seats will depend on what the pre-poll determines.
Yeah, sorry, Tony.
I was just going to say, and this is something that we get differently tonight to what we've ever had in the previous election.
Right. The pre-poll and postal vote figure is something like...
the point.
Is it 2 million?
Well, it's not only that they're bigger, but this time, for most seats, not all, the pre-poll will be counted tonight. So normally we don't get those results till later.
If you cast your pre-poll in your own seat, they count that tonight.
That's right.
Usually they wouldn't count it until
a couple of days later.
Yeah, so it's give and take. We'll get more information tonight than we would normally get, but more people have voted postal than ever before, and so there'll still be a whole lot uncounted.
Can I just,
while we're still on Robertson, just raise something that, while it's modest, I think is just an interesting thing that's happening in that seat, booth by booth, for the 3 booths that are in. And that is where our primary has gone down, and it has, the Liberal Party primary has also gone down. Now, one thing that I think, just in the mathematics of all this, is fair to say, is the coalition can't afford their primary vote to be dropping. If most of the vote that's happening is going to the Greens, where it leaves the major parties, and there's a view that at least a majority of that will end up going back to Labor, in seats where the Liberal primary is taking a hit, even though we don't have the 2-party preferred vote yet, that will be a serious hit for the coalition.
Clearly, any party, if their primary vote goes down, it's not good news for them. So if we don't win Robertson, I think it'll be difficult for us, but it's still early days.
Graham Morris.
Yeah, the Premier probably know these better than I do, but the McMaster's Beach booth, the Mooningboody booth and the Pretty Beach booths are all reporting swings to the Labor Party of about 5%. Now, yes, it's very, very early, but those three booths seem to be consistent. I'm not sure whether they'd be terrific coalition booths or shockers, but they're consistent.
McMaster's is a good coalition booth. Mooney, I've actually got our primary vote going down a little bit there, Graham, by 3%, but I've got the Liberal primary vote going down by 9%. And so in that context, when the two-party preferred works out, you would expect that that would be a significant gain for Labor in that booth. But we're talking about a fraction of the votes. But that trend, at least, is consistent.
Can we look at the adjoining seat of Dobell?
Yep. This one just further up the Central Coast. OK, what we're seeing there, 5.5% now counted. Craig Thompson is ahead on the primary vote, and I'm sure after preferences, let's have a look at that. This will be a swing. We haven't got it. No, too close. But he'd be certainly feeling better on that. Erica Betts, what do you think? Dobell wasn't one that the coalition perhaps had factored in as a likely win tonight, but what do you think? I mean, we're getting up to 5.5% counted there.
I don't have any figures in relation to Dobell. It wasn't one we were counting on, always hopeful, of course, but it's, too close to call. But with 5% of the vote counted, I dare say it's indicating the beginning of a trend in Dobell.
A trend against Labor?
Well, that the Labor Party will win.
Will hold that, yeah.
And one thing to remember here, David, for both Dobell and Robertson, we are talking about the same media market, the same local papers, the same local television stations.
Christina Keneally, how do you think Labor's going to go on those Central Coast seats tonight?
The first thing to note is what Tony's just pointed out. It's its own distinct media market. The Central Coast very much sees itself as its own distinct region, and the votes there will be on local issues, local candidates, very much so, and very distinct from the response you'll see in Sydney. There have been announcements on the Central Coast in terms of a much longed-for, desired cancer treatment centre, and that certainly does help.
Let's have a look, if we can, out in Western Sydney at Lindsay, because this is one of the seats that we'll want to keep a close eye on tonight. David Bradbury, the Labor member there, we've just got only 1% counted, so a bit hard to tell, but gee, that 1% isn't favouring him at all, is it? Fiona Scott, have a look after preferences. This is, OK, well, it's now saying nearly 3% counted. That's a healthy old swing.
Nearly too good to be true, I would say. I dare say that'll tighten up as the night progresses.
You take heart of it, though, wouldn't you?
But yeah, you do take heart. And Lindsay, we said, was one of those that we would need to pick up if we were to get over the line tonight. So let's hope that trend continues.
And for the two birds that are in Mulgoa and Leonard Public School, in each of those there's a significant improvement in the Liberal Party primary vote. Also in Lindsay, they were not directing, as far as I know, we weren't getting Greens preferences in that seat.
This gets back to the patchy result we're likely to see tonight. I mean, these early figures in Lindsay bad for Labor, in Robertson not so bad for Labor. Bruce Hawker, you've got some numbers?
That point of Tony's, it does look like there's a swing away from Labor of about 6.5% in Lindsay at this stage, but it's very early days.
All right.
That would lose us the seat.
I've got 7.5% in the early stuff, which, you know, is the first big one tonight where you'd get excited if you were the coalition.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's have a look at some of the other Sydney seats, if we can. Perhaps we'll have a look at Greenway. This is the seat that, well, has had quite a big redistribution, going from a Liberal seat to a... OK, zero, so nothing there yet.
Well,
but
you don't have numbers, but I've got some on that.
What have you got?
For the birds that are in at the moment, our primary... so this is just our primary versus the Lib, not counting any minor parties or Greens. We're at 53, Lib at 46.
Yeah.
Between the two there, no two-party preferred meaningful in, but
0.16 of the vote.
yeah, it's not
You're
much
sitting
in.
on nearly a 6% margin in Greenway.
You've got
You
to win
shouldn't
that.
lose
You've
it.
got to win that.
You
yeah,
shouldn't lose it.
But once again, if margins without incumbents,
If you lose it, we've won government. That
Yeah,
would be
margin-
my...
that may well be true.
Yeah, and
If
I
you've got a
can't...
couple of those seats coming in at around 5 or 6%, swings, I think it's a serious pointer to what can happen on the East Coast, I think.
Perhaps we should have a look at Bennelong while we're in Sydney and see what sort of early results we're seeing there. All right, so we've got still less than 1% counted there. This would only be, what, 1 or 2 birds?
It'd be very tight.
All right, so John Alexander won't be too unhappy with that. We'll come back to Bennelong and have a look. Bruce Hawker.
I just choose David, which is a seat which Labor would like to win. There's a swing away from Labor of about 5.5% at this stage. But it's held by the Libs, of course.
It is, yeah. So that won't...
But of course, the member there, Dana Vale, retired, so this is a new person running, so there was no incumbent. So Mr. Kelly, Craig Kelly, ought to be very happy.